The obsidian-like black credit card lay untouched on Amara's nightstand, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of extravagance that had engulfed the Hale estate for the past 3 days. The other servants, swept up in Victor Hale's bizarre social experiment, were indulging in shopping sprees that would make even the most seasoned royalty blush. From the sanctuary of his study, Victor observed it all with a detached amusement, meticulously tracking every purchase. He was like a scientist witnessing the irrefutable proof of his hypothesis. Give people unlimited wealth, and their true, greedy natures would inevitably surface. The obsequious butler, Gregory, had acquired a Rolex, its gaudy gleam a reflection of his newly inflated ego. The temperamental chef, Marcus, had splurged on a set of diamond-studded knives, their value exceeding that of a small car. And David, the chauffeur, a man perpetually striving to appear cultured, had booked himself first-class tickets to Monaco, envisioning himself hobnobbing with the elite. But then there was Amara, the quiet maid who cleaned his sprawling mansion with a diligence that bordered on invisibility, and who, Victor knew, sent every hard-earned penny back home to her ailing mother. She hadn't spent a single cent, and that singular act of restraint gnawed at Victor more than any billion-dollar deal gone south. He found himself, against all his cynical expectations, intrigued. Little did Victor know, Amara was about to unintentionally disrupt his carefully constructed worldview. She was about to teach the jaded billionaire that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in something far more profound. Before we delve deeper into this intriguing tale, I'm curious to know where in the world you're tuning in from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future narratives. The morning sun, a pale, watery disk in the sky, cast long, skeletal shadows across the polished marble floors of the Hale estate, a sprawling testament to obscene wealth. The mansion seemed to breathe affluence, radiating it from every meticulously polished surface, every priceless artwork, every imported artifact. Victor stood at his office window, a panoramic expanse of glass offering a commanding view of his meticulously manicured gardens. Below, his staff moved with the precision of clockwork, each cog performing its designated task. At 53, Victor Hale seemingly possessed everything money could buy: a fleet of private jets that allowed him to traverse the globe at a whim, a collection of luxury cars that would make a chic envious, and sprawling estates scattered across 3 continents, each a monument to his success. Yet, a persistent emptiness gnawed at his core, an ache that no amount of material possessions could alleviate. The media, with their insatiable appetite for sensationalism, loved to portray him as a ruthless titan of industry, a Gordon Gekko figure for the modern age. Victor had never bothered to correct them. Let them believe what they wanted. It was a convenient facade. His employees, however, whispered different stories, tales of unpredictable moods, bizarre personality, and strange tests of loyalty that kept everyone perpetually on edge. Some charitably labeled him eccentric, while others, in hushed tones when they thought no one was listening, used far less flattering terms. "Sir," his ever-present aide Jonathan announced, his voice a carefully modulated murmur as he knocked softly on the door. "The senior staff have assembled in the main hall as you requested." Victor turned from the window, a flicker of something akin to anticipation in his eyes. He straightened the impeccable lines of his Italian suit jacket, a garment that likely cost more than some of his staff earned in a year. "Good. It's time." The main hall buzzed with nervous energy, a palpable hum of apprehension that thickened the air. Victor entered, his presence immediately commanding attention. His senior staff, 23 in total, stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a carefully curated blend of curiosity and barely concealed apprehension. There was Gregory, the butler, who had served the Hale estate for 15 years, a man whose practiced smile never quite reached his eyes, a mask worn so long it had become inseparable from his true self. Marcus, the head chef, shifted his weight from foot to foot, his hands clasped nervously behind his back, his mind likely already calculating the potential profit margins of this unusual bonus. David, the chauffeur, maintained his usual air of false modesty, but Victor could see the cold, calculating glint behind his respectful gaze. "I've called you here today for something different," Victor began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, each word carefully chosen to maximize its impact. He reached into his jacket and produced a stack of black credit cards, each one gleaming like obsidian in the morning light, a symbol of limitless possibility. "These are connected to my personal account. No limits." A ripple of shock, quickly masked, passed through the group. Gregory's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place, a testament to his years of practice. Marcus' eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and he unconsciously rubbed his hands together, envisioning the culinary treasures he could acquire. "Buy whatever you want," Victor continued, his voice a low, almost hypnotic drone as he walked slowly along the line of staff, handing out the cards one by one. "Consider it a bonus, a gift, whatever helps you sleep at night. But know this, I will know who you really are by the choices you make." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with one of Marcus' newly acquired knives. Victor relished the palpable tension, the subtle shifts in body language, the frantic mental calculations as they tried to decipher the true purpose of this unexpected largesse. He was a puppeteer, and they were his marionettes, dancing to the tune of his whims. Is this some kind of test, Mr. Hale?" Susan, one of the housekeepers, ventured, her voice barely above a whisper, her fear radiating outwards like heat from a furnace. Victor's lips curved into what might have been a smile on another man's face, but on his, it looked more like a predator baring its teeth. "Everything in life is a test, Susan. The only difference is that this time, I'm grading on a curve." As he moved down the line, he came to Amara. She stood near the end, as she always did, instinctively trying to blend into the background, to become invisible. She was in her late 20s, with warm brown skin and eyes that held a quiet strength, a resilience that belied her unassuming demeanor. She was one of the newer additions to his household staff, a relative unknown in a sea of familiar faces. While the others had eagerly snatched their cards, their eyes gleaming with avarice, Amara hesitated, her hands remaining at her sides. "Take it," Victor said, holding the card out to her, his voice devoid of warmth, but laced with an undeniable curiosity. "Sir, I don't think I should," Amara stammered, her voice barely audible. "I insist," Victor responded, his tone leaving no room for argument. But inwardly, he found himself studying her reaction more closely than the others. There was something different about her hesitation, something that wasn't calculation or fear, but genuine discomfort with the offer itself. Amara's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted the card, holding it as if it might burn her skin. Victor's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, trying to decipher the enigma she presented, before he moved on, leaving her standing there, a silent question mark in his meticulously planned experiment. "No limits," he repeated to the group, his voice resonating with an almost unsettling intensity. "Show me your heart." The moment Victor left the hall, the whispers began, a cacophony of speculation and thinly veiled greed. "This has to be a trap," Gregory muttered to Marcus, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "He'll fire anyone who spends too much. Mark my words." "Or not enough," Marcus countered, his mind already racing with possibilities. "You know how he is with his games. He likes to see how far we'll go." David shook his head, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "The trick is to spend just right. Not too greedy, but enough to show appreciation. A delicate balance." Amara remained silent, the black card feeling impossibly heavy in her pocket, a burden rather than a gift. She watched as several of the staff members pulled out their phones, their fingers flying across the screens as they began browsing luxury websites. Gregory was already engrossed in a virtual tour of high-end watches, his fingers swiping through options that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Marcus had pulled up restaurant equipment catalogs, though Amara suspected that the items he was ogling weren't destined for the estate's kitchen. By evening, the spending had begun in earnest, a tangible manifestation of Victor's warped experiment. Gregory strutted through the servants' quarters wearing his new Rolex, ostentatiously ensuring that everyone saw its diamond-encrusted face catch the light. Marcus had ordered himself a set of Japanese chef's knives, each blade crafted from Damascus steel and worth more than a used car. David had been more subtle, but Amara had overheard him on the phone, his voice dripping with false casualness, as he booked a first-class trip to Monaco, complete with a stay at the Hotel de Paris. "What about you, Amara?" Susan asked, her curiosity genuine, untainted by the avarice that consumed the others. "What are you going to buy?" I haven't decided yet," Amara replied softly, avoiding eye contact. Gregory laughed derisively from across the room, his voice dripping with condescension. "She'll probably buy soap with that card. Maybe some discount cleaning supplies. Or perhaps she plans on donating it." The others chuckled, but Amara simply lowered her head and continued folding the linens she'd been working on, her silence a shield against their mockery. She'd learned long ago that the best defense against such petty taunts was to remain silent, to let their words wash over her without leaving a mark. From his private study, Victor watched the spending unfold in real time on his computer screen, each transaction appearing as a line item, telling its own story of greed and desire. The Rolex for Gregory entirely predictable. Marcus knives, at least professionally adjacent, a thinly veiled attempt at justification. David's Monaco trip, a desperate attempt to appear cultured. But Amara's card remained stubbornly unused, a blank space in his carefully constructed narrative. "Interesting," Victor murmured to Jonathan, who stood nearby with a tablet, ready to anticipate his every need. "She hasn't spent a penny. Perhaps she's planning something bigger, sir. Waiting for the right moment to make a truly extravagant purchase." Victor shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on Amara's name on the screen. "No, look at her history. Hired 8 months ago. Never a complaint, never a request for advancement or a raise. She keeps her head down, does her work, and disappears. She's either the smartest one of them all, or what, sir?" Jonathan prompted, his curiosity piqued. Victor didn't answer, but his eyes remained fixed on Amara's inactive card on the screen, a question mark in the sea of extravagant spending. "She'll be the one to watch," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. As night fell over the estate, casting long, eerie shadows across the manicured lawns and opulent interiors, Amara sat alone in her small, sparsely furnished room in the servants' quarters. The black card lay on her nightstand, its sleek surface reflecting the pale moonlight that streamed through her window. She could hear the faint sounds of the other staff members celebrating their purchases, comparing their acquisitions like trophies, each vying for the title of most extravagant spender. She picked up the card, turning it over in her hands, feeling its unusual weight. It was heavier than a normal credit card, crafted from a solid piece of metal rather than plastic. The weight of it seemed to represent everything it could do. Pay off her debts, secure her family's future, buy her things she'd only dreamed of owning. But every time she thought about using it, a profound sense of unease held her back, a moral compass that refused to be swayed by the allure of unlimited wealth. This wasn't her money. It wasn't earned or deserved. It was a test, a game orchestrated by a man whose motives she couldn't fathom, and she wasn't sure what the right answer was supposed to be. Was it to indulge in a frenzy of consumption, to prove that she, too, was susceptible to the lure of greed? Or was it to resist, to demonstrate a level of integrity that would set her apart from the others? The dilemma weighed heavily on her, a moral burden far heavier than the card itself. The alarm on Amara's phone buzzed insistently at 4:30 a.m., shattering the pre-dawn stillness. She silenced it quickly, not wanting to wake the other maids who shared the adjacent rooms, their sleep precious and hard-earned. In the darkness, she dressed in her uniform, a simple black dress with white trim that the estate required, and pinned her hair back into a neat bun, her movements practiced and efficient. This was her routine, a carefully orchestrated dance of early mornings and endless tasks that had been her life for the past 8 months. Before this job at the Hale estate, she'd been juggling 2 exhausting positions, cleaning offices at night and working at a grocery store during the day. Her body perpetually aching, her spirit perpetually weary. The estate position paid better than both combined, offering a glimmer of hope in a life defined by financial struggle. But it still wasn't enough. It was never enough when her mother needed expensive medications and her brother needed tuition money to continue his education. She moved through the pre-dawn quiet of the mansion, beginning her duties before the rest of the house stirred, her footsteps barely audible on the polished floors. The marble floors needed to be polished before Mr. Hale took his morning walk through the main hall, a ritual as ingrained as the rising of the sun. The silver in the dining room needed to be checked. Even though it had been cleaned yesterday, each piece scrutinized for the slightest imperfection. Perfection was the minimum standard here, a relentless pursuit of an unattainable ideal. As she worked, her mind drifted to the letter folded carefully in her pocket, its contents a constant source of anxiety. She'd been carrying it for 3 days now, as if keeping it close might somehow magically change what it said, erase the looming threat it represented. Final notice. The letter declared in stark, unforgiving terms. The landlord was tired of partial payments and broken promises. Full rent by the end of the week or start packing. The ultimatum hung over her like a dark cloud, threatening to shatter the fragile stability she had managed to create. Her phone vibrated softly, a text message from her younger brother Jerome, his concern palpable even in the brief digital message. Registration deadline is tomorrow. I can defer if you need me to. She typed back quickly, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. No, you focus on your studies. Don't worry about it. I've got it handled. She didn't have it handled. Not even close. But Jerome was so close to finishing his engineering degree, a milestone that represented their family's hopes and dreams. He was going to be the first in their family to graduate college, a beacon of hope in a lineage of hardship, and she'd sell her soul before she let him drop out now, before she allowed his dreams to be extinguished by the cold reality of their financial situation. The great room's grandfather clock chimed 6 times, its resonant tones echoing through the silent mansion, signaling the start of another day. Other staff members began to stir, their footsteps and voices gradually filling the air. Amara had already completed half her morning tasks, but she slowed her pace now, careful not to appear too eager or efficient. She'd learned that standing out in any way, good or bad, was dangerous in houses like this, that invisibility was the best form of self-preservation. Still pretending to be invisible, she nearly jumped when Gregory's voice shattered the quiet. The butler stood in the doorway, already dressed impeccably in his morning suit, his posture rigid and disapproving despite the early hour. "Just doing my job, Mr. Gregory," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He snorted derisively, his eyes scanning her with thinly veiled contempt. "Your job, right? We all saw how you hesitated yesterday with the card. What's wrong? Afraid to show your true colors?" "I don't know what you mean," Amara replied, keeping her eyes down, continuing to dust the mantelpiece with a practiced hand. "Oh, I think you do," Gregory said, stepping closer, invading her personal space, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Too pure to want nice things. Or maybe you're playing a longer game, trying to impress the old man with your virtue, hoping for a bigger reward down the line." Amara kept her eyes down, refusing to engage, continuing to dust the mantelpiece as if he weren't even there. "I just need time to think about it," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. Gregory laughed, a cold, brittle sound like ice cracking. "Time to think? Sure, just remember, little girl, in this house, the ones that don't play the game get played themselves." After he left, Amara's hands trembled slightly as she finished her dusting, her carefully constructed composure momentarily shaken. She hated how small he could make her feel with just a few words, how easily he could chip away at her self-confidence. But she had bigger problems than Gregory's disdain, more pressing concerns that demanded her attention. During her lunch break, a meager 20 minutes in the sterile confines of the servant's kitchen, she made her daily phone call home, her heart heavy with anxiety. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring, her voice weak but warm, a familiar comfort in a world of uncertainty. "Amara, baby, you don't need to call every day. I don't want you to be worrying about me." "I want to, Mama. How are you feeling?" Amara asked, her voice laced with concern. "Oh, good days and bad days. Today's a good one," her mother replied, her voice betraying a hint of fatigue. Amara could hear the lie in her mother's voice, the subtle nuances that revealed the truth, but she didn't challenge it, knowing that her mother was just trying to protect her. "Are you taking all your medications?" "When I can," her mother hedged, avoiding a direct answer. "That new prescription the doctor wanted. The pharmacy said insurance won't cover it, but don't worry about that. The other medicines are working fine." Amara closed her eyes, adding another item to the endless list of things she needed to pay for, another burden to carry on her already overburdened shoulders. "I'll figure something out, Mama. I always do. You worry too hard, baby. When's the last time you did something nice for yourself?" her mother asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine, Mama. You just focus on getting better," Amara replied, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. After the call, Amara sat alone in the empty kitchen, staring at the black card she'd pulled from her pocket, its sleek surface mocking her. One swipe could solve everything, she realized, her mind calculating the possibilities. Her mother's medications, Jerome's tuition, the rent. All of it could be taken care of with a single, decisive act. Mr. Hale had said no limits, but it wasn't hers, and taking what wasn't hers, even when it was offered, felt like crossing a line she'd drawn for herself long ago, a boundary she refused to breach. "Talking to yourself?" Marcus entered the kitchen, his new designer watch gleaming ostentatiously on his wrist. Another purchase from yesterday's spending spree. "Just thinking," Amara replied, quickly tucking the card back into her pocket. "About what you're going to buy. Let me guess. Something practical? Maybe groceries, or perhaps some cheap cleaning supplies." He laughed at his own joke, his eyes filled with self-satisfaction. "You should live a little, Amara. When's the next time a billionaire's going to hand you an unlimited credit card?" After Marcus left, Amara found herself alone again, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos, seeking solace in the faces of her loved ones. Jerome at his university, looking proud in front of the engineering building, a symbol of their shared aspirations. Her mother from last Christmas, before the illness had taken so much of her strength, her smile radiant with love. These were her riches, she reminded herself, the true treasures in her life. These were what mattered, not the fleeting allure of material possessions. The afternoon brought its usual challenges, a series of minor irritations that tested her patience and resilience. Mrs. Wellington, Mr. Hale's stern estate manager, found fault with how Amara had arranged the guest room linens, claiming they weren't perfectly aligned. One of the junior maids accidentally knocked over a priceless vase while Amara was cleaning nearby, making it look like her fault, her carelessness threatening to implicate Amara in the mishap. As Amara navigated this minefield of petty dramas and unreasonable demands, the groundskeeper's daughter, Lucy, a bright and inquisitive 8-year-old, wandered into the servants' area, her face creased with worry, looking for help with her homework. "Miss Amara, can you help me with my fractions?" Lucy asked, her math textbook clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes pleading for assistance. "Of course, sweetheart," Amara replied, her voice softening, her heart touched by the child's vulnerability. "Let's sit over here and see what we can do." As Amara patiently explained how to find common denominators, guiding Lucy through the intricacies of fractions with gentle encouragement, she didn't notice Victor watching from the doorway of his study, which offered a clear view of the servants' courtyard. He observed how she gave the child her complete attention, how she celebrated each small understanding with genuine enthusiasm, her face lighting up with joy at Lucy's progress. "Sir," Jonathan appeared at his elbow, his voice carefully measured. "The Johnson meeting has been moved to 3. I'll need confirmation on." "Cancel it," Victor said, his voice curt, his eyes not taking his eyes off the scene below. "Sir, Jonathan began, hesitating, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "I said cancel it," Victor repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jonathan wisely didn't press further, recognizing the futility of arguing with his employer when he was in one of his unpredictable moods. In all his years of service, he'd never seen Mr. Hale this interested in the household staff's daily activities, this invested in the minutiae of their lives. As evening approached, the divide between Amara and the other staff members who'd received cards became more pronounced, an invisible chasm separating them. They gathered in clusters, showing off their purchases or planning new ones, their conversations filled with boasts and envious glances. David was regaling the others with tales of the yacht he'd chartered for his Monaco trip, exaggerating the size of the vessel and the opulence of its amenities. Susan, her face flushed with excitement, was showing off a designer handbag she'd coveted for years, stroking the leather with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Even the quiet groundskeeper had purchased a new set of professional tools, his eyes gleaming with pride as he described their superior quality. "What about you, church mouse?" Gregory called out to Amara as she passed through the common area, her head down, still clutching that card like it might disappear if she let go. "Leave her alone, Gregory," Susan said, though not unkindly, her curiosity piqued. "Maybe she's just being careful, taking her time to make the right decision." "Careful," Gregory scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's one word for it. I call it ungrateful. The old man gives her a blank check, and she's too good to use it?" Amara escaped to her room, but their words followed her, echoing in her mind. Was she being ungrateful? Mr. Hale had given them a gift, a chance to indulge their desires, and she was the only one not using it. But every time she thought about spending the money, she remembered her grandmother's words that had been etched into her soul since childhood. What comes too easy leaves just as fast. True wealth is earned, not given. That night, unable to sleep, she sat by her window and watched the moon travel across the sky, its pale light painting the room in shades of silver and gray. The black card sat on her nightstand, a constant reminder of the difficult choice she had to make, a symbol of the conflicting forces that were tearing her apart. Tomorrow, her landlord would want an answer about the rent, a definitive promise she couldn't make. Tomorrow, Jerome needed his tuition payment, or his dreams would be deferred indefinitely. Tomorrow, her mother would need those expensive medications, or her health would continue to decline. She picked up the card, feeling its weight once more, the physical manifestation of her moral dilemma. Tomorrow, she decided, tomorrow she would make a choice, a decision that would change everything, though she didn't yet know how much. From his bedroom suite, Victor also found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing, his carefully constructed worldview challenged by the unexpected behavior of one unassuming maid. He'd watched the card activity all day, tracking the thousands upon thousands spent by his staff on luxury goods, exotic vacations, and fleeting indulgences, each purchase a confirmation of his cynical beliefs. "All except one," he murmured to the darkness, his voice barely audible, thinking of the quiet maid who had helped a child with homework instead of shopping for herself, who had chosen compassion over consumption. He'd designed this test to reveal greed, to confirm his belief that everyone had a price, that loyalty was just a transaction waiting for the right number. But Amara was breaking his rules, refusing to play the game at all. Victor walked to his window, looking out at the servants' quarters where a single light still burned, a solitary beacon in the darkness. He didn't know what disturbed him more, that she hadn't spent anything, or that he found himself inexplicably hoping she wouldn't, that a part of him longed to be proven wrong. The next morning arrived with a heavy, gray sky that matched Amara's mood, the oppressive cloud cover mirroring the weight of her decision. She had made her choice during the sleepless night, a resolution forged in the crucible of her conscience. And now the black card felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket as she took the bus into the city, her destination far removed from the opulent world she inhabited within the walls of the Hale estate. She told Mrs. Wellington she needed to handle a family emergency, a vague explanation designed to avoid scrutiny. Accepting the dock and pay without complaint, she boarded the bus, her heart pounding in her chest. But instead of heading to the luxury district where the other staff members had done their shopping, she got off the bus in a part of town that hadn't seen renovation money in decades, a neighborhood scarred by poverty and neglect. The streets were cracked and uneven, the sidewalks crumbling under the weight of years of neglect. The buildings wore their age like badges of hard-won survival. Their facades faded and weathered, their windows often boarded up or broken. And the people moved with a kind of purposeful stride that came from having somewhere important to be and not enough time to get there, their faces etched with the lines of hardship and resilience. Her first stop was a pharmacy that looked nothing like the gleaming chains in the wealthy neighborhoods, a small, independent establishment that catered to the needs of the community. The windows were covered with handwritten signs advertising discounts on generic medications, and a bell from the 1950s chimed merrily when she pushed open the door, its sound a nostalgic echo of a simpler time. "Can I help you?" The elderly pharmacist looked up from his work, adjusting his thick glasses and peering at her over the rim, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and weariness. "Yes, I need to fill several prescriptions," Amara said, pulling out a list she'd carefully compiled, her hands trembling slightly. "And I want to pay for any medications that are being held for people who couldn't afford them." The pharmacist's eyebrows rose in surprise, his eyes widening behind his glasses. That's very generous, but that could be quite expensive. We have about 12 prescriptions on hold right now, people who just can't afford to pay." "That's fine," Amara said quietly, sliding the black card across the counter, her voice firm despite her nervousness. His eyes widened further when he saw the card, the sleek black rectangle a stark contrast to the worn countertop. Anyone who worked in customer service knew what that particular shade of black meant. Unlimited funds, the kind of card that only the ultra-wealthy carried. He looked from the card to Amara's simple clothes and worn shoes, a visible confusion clouding his face. Are you sure?" "Yes, but please don't make a fuss about it," Amara said quickly, avoiding his gaze. "Just tell people their medications were covered by an anonymous donor. I don't want them to know it was me." As the pharmacist began processing the prescriptions, his movements slow and deliberate, Amara wandered the aisles, filling a basket with basic necessities. Children's vitamins, bandages, over-the-counter pain relievers, the kinds of things she knew people in her neighborhood often went without when money was tight. She added notebooks and pencils, remembering how Jerome had sometimes gone without school supplies when they were younger, forced to share with classmates or make do with scraps. "And these too," she said, placing the basket on the counter next to the prescriptions. The pharmacist's hands shook slightly as he rang up the total, his face pale with disbelief. "Miss, this is over $3,000. "That's fine," Amara repeated, though her own hands trembled as she signed the receipt, the enormity of the transaction sinking in. It was more money than she'd ever spent at once in her life, a sum that could have transformed her own circumstances. "The people who get those medications, they're going to be so grateful," the pharmacist said, his voice choked with emotion. "Mrs. Chun has been rationing her heart medication for months, and the Williams family, their son needs those antibiotics for his asthma. This is going to make a real difference. Please don't tell them it was me," Amara insisted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's important that they don't know. I don't want any recognition." She left quickly before the pharmacist could ask more questions, her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of relief and trepidation warring within her. She walked 6 blocks to her next destination, St. Mary's General Hospital, her footsteps purposeful, her determination unwavering. It was the kind of public hospital that served people who couldn't afford anything better, a place where the walls needed paint, the equipment was always a generation behind, and the waiting rooms were perpetually overcrowded. Amara knew this hospital well, having spent countless hours within its walls during her mother's illness. It was where her mother had first been diagnosed, where they'd received the devastating news with kindness, but also with a harsh reality of what treatment would cost, a financial burden that threatened to crush them. She approached the billing department, a small, windowless office tucked away on the first floor, a place where people went to negotiate payment plans they'd never be able to complete, to plead for leniency, to face the cold, hard reality of medical debt. "I want to pay off some overdue accounts," she told the clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who looked like she'd heard every hard luck story twice, her face etched with a mixture of compassion and resignation. "Are these family accounts?" Patricia asked, her fingers poised over her keyboard. No. I want to pay for people who are about to be sent to collections, families with children if possible, people who are struggling and can't afford to pay. Amara replied, her voice firm. Patricia stared at her, her expression incredulous. I'm sorry, what? I don't think I understand. You want to pay off other people's medical debt? I know there must be families who owe money they can't pay. People who are avoiding medical care because of existing debt. Amara said, her voice pleading. I want to help with that. I have the means to help, and I want to use it to make a difference. That's highly unusual, Patricia said, shaking her head in disbelief. I need to speak with my supervisor. This is beyond my authority. 20 minutes later, Amara sat across from the billing department director, a stern woman named Ms. Howard who kept eyeing the black card Amara had placed on the desk like it might be fake, her skepticism palpable. You want to pay off random medical debts? Ms. Howard asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Why? What's the catch? Because I can, Amara said simply, meeting Ms. Howard's gaze without flinching. And because they need it. It's the right thing to do. This is highly irregular. How do I know this card is legitimate? How do I know you're not trying to scam us? Ms. Howard challenged, her eyes narrowed. Run it for a small amount first, Amara suggested calmly. $1. Verify it however you need to. I understand your concerns. Ms. Howard did exactly that, her fingers tapping nervously on her desk as she waited for the transaction to process. And when the charge went through instantly, her demeanor changed, her skepticism giving way to a cautious curiosity. How much are we talking about? What's your limit? How much would it take to clear the accounts of 3 families who are facing collections? Amara asked, her heart pounding in her chest. Ms. Howard typed on her computer, her fingers moving quickly over the keys as she pulled up the relevant records. I have a single mother here who owes $8,000 for her daughter's emergency surgery, a family of 4 who owes $12,000 for the father's cancer treatment, and an elderly couple who owes $6,000 for various procedures related to their chronic illnesses. $26,000 total, Amara concluded, her voice barely a whisper. $26,437. Ms. Howard corrected, her eyes wide with disbelief. I'll pay it all, Amara said, her voice firm despite her trembling hands. The room went silent except for the hum of the ancient air conditioning unit, the silence broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Ms. Howard's fingers hesitating over her keyboard. Can I ask why you're doing this? Ms. Howard asked, her voice softening slightly, her curiosity finally overcoming her skepticism. Amara thought of her mother, of the bills piling up, of the weight that never seemed to lift, the constant anxiety that gnawed at her. Because nobody should have to choose between their health and their home, she said, her voice filled with conviction. Everyone deserves access to medical care, regardless of their ability to pay. As the transactions processed, Amara could hear a commotion in the hallway, a chorus of voices filled with surprise and relief. Through the office window, she saw a woman crying, clutching a piece of paper while her 2 children hugged her legs, their faces radiant with joy. They just told me my debt was paid. The woman was saying to a nurse, her voice choked with emotion. I don't understand. Who would do that? Amara slipped out through a side door before anyone could connect her to the payments, wanting to avoid any recognition or gratitude. She walked quickly through the hospital corridors, past the emergency room where a young mother sat with a feverish infant, past the pharmacy where an elderly man counted coins for his prescription, her heart aching with empathy. She wanted to help them all, to alleviate their suffering, but she knew that would draw too much attention, that she had already done too much, been too visible. She worried she'd compromised her anonymity, that her actions would somehow be traced back to her. Her last stop was a community center she'd passed many times on the bus but had never entered, a place she knew served as a lifeline for struggling families in the neighborhood. It was the kind of place that survived on donations and volunteer work, providing after-school programs for kids whose parents worked multiple jobs. A safe haven where children could learn and play. I'd like to make a donation, she told the director, a cheerful woman named Ms. Rodriguez who wore paint stains on her jeans like medals of honor, a testament to her dedication and hard work. How wonderful! Ms. Rodriguez exclaimed, her face lighting up with a warm smile. Every little bit helps. We're always in need of funding. I want to buy supplies for the after-school program, Amara clarified, her voice firm. Here is the translation, rewritten and expanded as requested. It wasn't just about getting the right things to clean or cook with, it was about giving those kids a real place to play, a real shot at a normal childhood, somewhere they wouldn't have to worry about rusted swing sets, basketball hoops that were always bent, soccer balls always patched up with duct tape. I don't even know your name, Ms. Rodriguez managed to say, tears now flowing freely down her face, each one a testament to years of struggle and hope. That's okay, Amara replied softly, her voice barely a whisper in the bustling community center. The kids don't need to know who. They just need to know someone cares, that there is still some kindness in this world for them. As Amara rode the bus back toward the gilded cage of the Hale estate, she found herself among some of the very families she'd encountered at the hospital. The single mother from the billing office, her face lit with a mixture of relief and disbelief, was on her phone, her voice trembling as she recounted the miracle that had unfolded. An elderly man, his hands shaking, clutched his newly filled prescription bag as if it contained the most precious gold. Each pill a lifeline he thought he'd have to surrender. None of them recognized her. None of them would ever know her name. And that was precisely how she wanted it. Back at the estate, Victor sat cloistered in his study, his brow furrowed with a growing sense of bewilderment as he watched the card transactions flicker across his monitor. Pharmacy purchases in a forgotten corner of the city. Hospital payment department charges. Sizable donations to the local community center. Sir, you need to see this, Jonathan said, entering the study with his tablet held aloft, his usually impassive face betraying a hint of surprise. The charges on Ms. Amara's card. I'm looking at them now, Victor replied, his voice laced with a mixture of irritation and intrigue. The location data indicates she spent the entire day in the Riverside district. That's the poorest area of the city. Victor finished the sentence, his eyes scanning the transactions. He pulled up the detailed records, a deep frown etching itself onto his face as he took in the scope of her actions. She paid off medical debts for people she doesn't even know. It appears so, sir. The hospital confirmed 3 families had their entire balances cleared. Families that were on the brink of utter ruin. Victor leaned back in his leather chair, a strange, unfamiliar sensation stirring in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite place. Why would she do that? What's her angle? Everyone has an angle. Perhaps there isn't one, sir, Jonathan offered cautiously, his eyes fixed on his tablet. There's always an angle, Jonathan, Victor insisted, his voice sharp. People don't simply give away money to strangers. It's not in our nature. But even as he spoke the words, Victor found himself doubting his own convictions. He had been so certain this twisted experiment would expose the greed and selfishness lurking beneath the surface of every human soul, their true nature laid bare. Instead, Amara had done something that defied his understanding, something that challenged the very foundation of his worldview. Should I have her investigated more thoroughly? Jonathan asked, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. Yes. Victor paused, then added, No, I don't know. He stood and began pacing restlessly toward the window, his gaze fixed on the distant cityscape. What kind of person does this? What goes through their mind? That evening, dinner at the estate was more strained than usual, the air thick with unspoken tension. The staff members who'd received the cards were ostentatiously displaying their latest acquisitions, their voices louder, their laughter forced. But there was an undercurrent of unease as they noticed Amara's continued silence regarding her own spending. So, Amara, Gregory announced loudly, his voice cutting through the polite chatter like a knife. We're all just dying to know what you bought with Mr. Hale's generous gift. Don't keep us in suspense. Amara focused on serving the soup course, her movements precise and deliberate, as if she were trying to create a shield of composure. Just some things that were needed, she said softly. Things that were needed? Marcus echoed with a sneer. What? Did you buy a lifetime supply of mops and buckets? Leave her alone, Marcus, Susan interjected, though even she couldn't hide her curiosity. Not everyone feels the need to broadcast their purchases for the entire world to see. Come on. David chimed in, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. We're all friends here, aren't we? I showed you all my Monaco booking, didn't I? Gregory had shown off that gaudy Rolex watch enough times that they could probably draw it from memory. What's the big secret, Amara? There's no secret, Amara said quietly, her eyes fixed on the table. I just bought some necessities. Gregory's eyes narrowed, suspicion hardening his features. Necessities, right? You know what I think? I think you're playing some kind of game, putting on an act. Acting all humble and modest to impress the old man. That's not Amara began, her voice barely a whisper. Then prove it, Gregory interrupted, his voice rising. Show us a receipt. Tell us what you bought. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on Amara. Each gaze a mixture of judgment, suspicion, and a perverse eagerness for drama. She could feel their collective scrutiny weighing down on her. Each glance a pinprick of discomfort. I bought supplies, she said finally, her voice clear despite the tremor in her heart. Medical supplies, school supplies, things people needed. The laughter that erupted was immediate and harsh, a wave of ridicule washing over her. Medical supplies? Gregory wheezed between fits of laughter, clutching his chest dramatically. You had an unlimited credit card and you bought bandages? Is this some kind of joke? Who buys school supplies with a billionaire's card? Marcus added, shaking his head in mock disbelief. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Amara retreated to the kitchen as quickly as she could, the sound of their derisive laughter echoing in her ears, each peal a stab of pain. She stood at the sink, her hands trembling as she washed dishes that were already spotless, the hot water doing little to soothe the chill that had settled deep within her bones. Unbeknownst to her, Victor had heard every word from his hidden vantage point in the adjacent dining room. He had been about to enter when the conversation began, but something, a mixture of curiosity and a strange sense of foreboding, had compelled him to remain hidden, an invisible observer of the drama unfolding before him. Jonathan, he said quietly to his aide, who stood silently beside him, his face an unreadable mask. I want you to verify her story, discreetly. Of course, sir. Victor returned to his study, but concentration eluded him. He found himself haunted by Amara's simple words. Things people needed. There had been no pride in her voice, no hint of false modesty seeking praise, just a quiet, matter-of-fact statement that resonated within him, a subtle dissonance in the symphony of his carefully constructed world. His phone rang, his lawyer calling about some high-stakes acquisition he was supposed to care deeply about, a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But Victor's mind kept drifting back to the quiet maid who had chosen medical supplies over jewels, who had found more value in bandages than in baubles. A memory surfaced unbidden from the depths of his past. Himself at 25, before the money, before the empire, before the corrosive effects of unchecked success. His girlfriend at the time, Sarah, a woman with a smile as bright as the morning sun and a heart as pure as driven snow, had found his wallet on the street, returned it to him with every single bill intact. He had been suspicious, of course. He'd counted the money 3 times, convinced that she must have taken something, even a few dollars. When he realized she hadn't, he'd asked her why. Because it wasn't mine, she'd said simply, her eyes meeting his with unwavering honesty. They dated for 2 years, years filled with laughter, shared dreams, and a genuine connection that transcended material possessions. He had been happy then, genuinely happy in a way he hadn't felt since. But when the money started pouring in, when success began to warp and change him, she had left, unable to reconcile the man he was becoming with the man she had loved. You're becoming someone I don't recognize, she'd said, her voice filled with a profound sadness. Someone who sees the worst in everyone because you can't imagine anyone being better than you are. Victor shook off the unwelcome memory, banishing the ghost of Sarah from his thoughts. That was decades ago, a lifetime ago. He had learned since then that Sarah had been naive, idealistic, that everyone eventually had a price. This maid, Amara, would prove to be no different. She had to be working some kind of angle, manipulating the situation for her own benefit in a way he hadn't yet discerned. The next morning, he summoned Amara to his study, his voice devoid of warmth. She entered nervously, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route, clearly expecting a reprimand for yesterday's perceived transgressions. "Sit," he said curtly, gesturing toward a chair across from his imposing desk. She perched on the very edge of the seat, her body tense, as if she were ready to flee at a moment's notice. "I'm curious about your purchases yesterday," Victor said. His eyes narrowed as he scrutinized her every move. "Medical supplies, was it?" "Yes, sir." "And some school supplies? For yourself?" "No, sir." "For family?" Amara hesitated, her gaze flickering down to her worn shoes. "For people who needed them, sir." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying her with a clinical detachment, his mind racing. She met his gaze briefly, then quickly looked away, but not before he caught a glimpse of something in her eyes, something that surprised him. Not guilt or deception, but a kind of quiet resignation, as if she were accustomed to not being believed, as if she expected the world to misunderstand her. "You spent over $70,000 on supplies for strangers." Her eyes widened slightly, betraying a hint of surprise. She hadn't realized he could see the precise amounts, that every purchase was meticulously tracked. Yes, sir. I'm sorry if that was too much. You said no limits, but I understand if I dash." "I'm not concerned about the amount," Victor interrupted, his voice cutting through her stammering apologies. "I'm curious about the why. What compelled you to do it?" Amara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the walls of the study. Then, she finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Have you ever needed medicine you couldn't afford, Mr. Hale?" The question caught him completely off guard, disarming him with its unexpected directness. "No." "Have you ever had to choose between keeping the lights on and buying your child's school supplies?" "No." "Then I don't think I can explain it in a way you'd understand, sir," she said, her voice devoid of malice or judgment. Just a simple statement of fact that somehow cut deeper than any insult could have. Victor dismissed her, but her words continued to echo in his mind long after she had left the study. That afternoon, driven by an impulse he couldn't quite explain, he did something he hadn't done in years. He drove himself, without David, his ever-present driver, to the addresses where she had made her purchases, wanting to see for himself the impact of her actions. The pharmacy was his first stop. The elderly pharmacist, a man with kind eyes and a warm smile, recognized the black card transaction immediately when Victor inquired, his face lighting up with genuine warmth. "That young lady is an angel," the man said, completely oblivious to Victor's true identity. "Mrs. Chun came in today for her heart medication, tears streaming down her face. She cried when I told her it had been paid for. She's been choosing between food and medicine for months, a choice no one should ever have to make." "And you don't know who the woman was who paid?" Victor asked, his curiosity piqued. "She insisted on staying anonymous. Said she didn't want any thanks. But between you and me," the pharmacist lowered his voice conspiratorially, "she didn't look like someone who had that kind of money. Worn shoes, simple clothes, the kind of clothes you'd find at any local thrift store. I thought maybe she was using someone else's card, doing a good deed for an employer, maybe." Victor drove to the hospital next. He had to use his considerable influence to get the billing director to agree to speak with him, a favor he rarely had to ask for. And even then, Ms. Howard, a woman with a perpetually harried expression, was reluctant to share any information, citing patient confidentiality. "Patient privacy is paramount," she said stiffly, her arms crossed defensively. "I'm not asking for patient information," Victor clarified, his voice laced with impatience. "I'm asking about the woman who paid their bills, the one who used my black card." "I can't discuss that either," Ms. Howard replied, her tone unyielding. Victor pulled out his checkbook, his gaze unwavering. "What if I wanted to make a similar donation? Say $100,000 to clear more patient debts. Would that change things?" Ms. Howard's demeanor shifted immediately, her eyes widening slightly as she considered the possibilities. Well, that would be incredibly generous, Mr. Hale. Incredibly generous. Victor Hale, he clarified, watching her reaction. Her eyes widened further in recognition. The Victor Hale. But then, the card that woman used was yours? Yes, she's an employee. I'm trying to understand what she did here. Why she did it. Ms. Howard relaxed slightly, her professional facade softening. She was remarkable, Mr. Hale. She specifically asked for families with children who were facing collections, families teetering on the brink of financial ruin. She didn't want any recognition, refused to even give her name. There was a family she specifically helped? Victor inquired, suddenly finding himself deeply invested in the story. Yes, the Johnsons. They were about to declare bankruptcy. The father has cancer, and the medical bills are destroying them one after another. Your employee saved them from losing everything they have. Victor wrote the check, partly to maintain his carefully constructed cover story, but mostly because something about Amara's actions had stirred something within him, a sense of shame, perhaps, or a dawning realization of the vast chasm between his immense wealth and the desperate struggles of ordinary people. He had more money than he could possibly spend in 10 lifetimes. And until yesterday, it had never once occurred to him to pay off a stranger's medical debt, to alleviate the crushing burden of illness for a family he didn't even know. His last stop was the local community center, a place he wouldn't have dreamed of visiting just days earlier. Ms. Rodriguez, the center's director, practically glowed when she spoke about the donation, her eyes shining with gratitude. The kids are going to be so thrilled, she gushed, her voice filled with excitement. We've been using computers from 2010 dinosaurs in the tech world. Half of them don't even turn on anymore. And the art supplies. We've been rationing crayons, for goodness sakes. Crayons. Can you imagine? But that woman, she just asked what we needed and bought it all. She had all of the needed school supplies available for these children. Did she say why? Victor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No, but I could tell she understood these kids. The way she asked about the after-school programs, about homework help, she knew what it was like to need these services. It was like she was once them and was now giving back. Victor sat in his car afterward, staring at the unassuming community center where children were beginning to arrive for the after-school programs. They ran in with the boundless energy only kids could muster after a full day of school. Backpacks bouncing, voices high with excitement. One little girl dropped her folder, papers scattering across the sidewalk like fallen leaves. Before anyone else could react, a teenager rushed to help her gather them up, making sure nothing was lost. Such a small act of kindness, but it made the little girl smile as if she'd been given the greatest gift in the world. Asterisk, is this what Amara saw? Asterisk, he wondered, a growing sense of understanding washing over him. Asterisk, these small moments, where help mattered, where even the smallest act of generosity could make a world of difference. That evening, Victor found himself in a position he had never been in before, unsure what to think about someone. He had built his fortune on reading people, on understanding their motivations, on exploiting their weaknesses and capitalizing on their desires. But Amara had done something that didn't fit any pattern he knew, something that defied all his carefully crafted assumptions. He called Jonathan to his study, his voice unusually hesitant. What did you find out about her background? She's been supporting her family since she was 16, sir, Jonathan replied, his voice betraying a hint of admiration. Her mother has lupus, which requires expensive treatment, multiple medications. Her younger brother is in his final year of engineering school. She's been paying his tuition all along. She works here and sends most of her salary home? Victor asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, sir. So, she could have used that money for her own family, desperately needed it for her own family. Sir, I found a notice of eviction in her background check. She's behind on rent, sir. Her mother needs medications they can't afford, and the brother's tuition is overdue. Everything is in the red. Victor felt something shift in his chest, an uncomfortable tightness that he couldn't ignore. But she didn't use it for any of that, Jonathan continued, his voice quiet. Not a penny, sir. Every charge was for strangers. Victor stood at his window, looking out at the servants' quarters, where lights were beginning to flicker on in the small, cramped rooms. In one of those rooms, a woman who couldn't pay her own rent had spent $70,000 on strangers' medical bills, on making a difference in the lives of people she had never met and would likely never see again. "Sir," Jonathan ventured, breaking the silence that had settled over the study. "If I may ask, what was the real purpose of this test?" Victor was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I wanted to prove that everyone is selfish at heart, that given the chance, people will always choose themselves first, that their true nature will reveal itself in a moment of power." "And Ms. Amara?" Victor didn't answer, but the truth sat heavy in his chest, a crushing weight of self-reproach. She hadn't just passed his test. She had revealed it for what it was. A cynical game played by a man who had forgotten that genuine goodness could exist. A man who had become so consumed by his own wealth and power that he had lost sight of the simple human values that truly mattered. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Gregory, the butler, his face wearing its usual mask of false concern, his eyes gleaming with a hint of malice. "Sir, I thought you should know," Gregory said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "Some of the staff are concerned about Amara's purchases. They think she might be using your kindness to fund some kind of scheme. It's just not natural." "What kind of scheme?" Victor asked, his voice flat, his eyes boring into the butler. "Perhaps she knows these people she's helping, sir. Perhaps she's getting kickbacks somehow, some kind of monetary reward for her kindness. It just seems suspicious, sir. Nobody is that selfless without an agenda. It defies logic." Victor looked at Gregory, really looked at him, seeing him not as a loyal servant, but as a sycophant, a man who had immediately bought himself an expensive watch and was now trying to tear down the one person who had shown genuine kindness, whose actions had revealed the emptiness of their own materialistic pursuits. "You're right, Gregory," Victor said slowly, a hint of irony lacing his voice. "Nobody is that selfless without an agenda." Gregory smiled, completely missing the subtle undercurrent of Victor's words. "Exactly, sir. Shall I keep an eye on her? Make sure she doesn't step out of line?" "No," Victor said, his voice firm. "I'll handle this personally." After Gregory had left, Victor made a decision that would change the course of his life. He would investigate further, but not through corporate spies or background checks, not through the cold, impersonal lens of his vast resources. He would do something he hadn't done in decades. He would actually pay attention to someone besides himself, to see the world through their eyes, to understand the motivations behind their actions. The days following Victor's impromptu investigation passed in a strange, unsettling tension that seemed to permeate the entire estate. Victor found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, actually observing the daily life of his household, particularly one member of it. He watched from his study window as Amara arrived each morning before dawn, always using the servants' entrance, even though the main door would have been far more convenient, a small act of humility he couldn't ignore. He noticed how she ate her lunch alone in the garden, sitting on the same worn bench under the ancient oak tree, reading tattered library books with cracked spines, her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw how she stayed late to help other maids finish their work, never asking for credit or recognition. Her quiet efficiency a stark contrast to the others' gossipy chatter. But it was the small, seemingly insignificant moments that unsettled him the most, that chipped away at his carefully constructed cynicism. The way she hummed softly while polishing silver, not the forced cheerfulness of someone trying to appear happy, but a genuine contentment that seemed to emanate from within, despite her own struggles and hardships. The way she carefully saved half of her dinner roll each night, wrapping it neatly in a napkin, a small act of self-denial that puzzled him. He later learned that she gave these rolls to the homeless man who slept near the bus stop, a quiet act of charity that spoke volumes about her character. 3 nights after his visits to the pharmacy, the hospital, and the community center, Victor found himself unable to sleep, the weight of his own wealth and the stark contrast of Amara's selflessness pressing down on him like a physical burden. The children from the community center haunted him, their faces blurring into a single, collective image of need and hope. Not any specific child, but the idea of them, the collective vulnerability of a generation struggling against poverty and neglect. When had he last thought about children needing crayons? What had transformed such basic human needs into something invisible to him, shrouded in the comfortable insulation of his own privilege? At 2 o'clock in the morning, driven by an irresistible impulse, he found himself walking through the servants' wing, something he had never done before in all his years in the mansion. The hallway was narrow, the carpet threadbare and worn, the walls desperately needing a fresh coat of paint. How had he never noticed the stark contrast between the opulence of the main house and the conditions in which his staff lived, the quiet suffering hidden just beneath the surface of his gilded world? A thin line of light shone from under one of the doors. It was Amara's room. He could hear her voice, soft and strained, carrying through the thin walls. "I know, Mama," she was saying, her voice filled with a mixture of tenderness and worry. "I know it's overdue. I'll figure something out. I always do." A pause, then, "No, don't ask Jerome to drop out of school. Please, Mama. He's so close to finishing, and I can't let him be like me." Another pause, a sigh. "Yes, Mama. I love you too." Victor retreated quickly, his heart pounding in his chest, her words echoing in his ears. She could have paid for everything with his card, he thought, a wave of guilt washing over him. One swipe could have solved all her problems, lifted her family out of poverty, ensured her mother's health and her brother's future. Instead, she had given it all to strangers, choosing to sacrifice her own needs for the well-being of others. The next morning, he called Jonathan to his study, his voice firm. "Double Amara's salary, starting today." Jonathan's eyebrows rose slightly, the most emotion Victor had ever seen him display. "Of course, sir. May I ask why?" "No," Victor said curtly, then softened his tone. "Just do it and backdate it 3 months. Make it so she has enough to get herself out of debt." "Sir, that would be a significant sum," Jonathan said, his voice filled with concern. "I'm aware of what it would be, Jonathan," Victor replied, his voice firm. "Just do it." But even as he gave the order, Victor knew it wasn't enough. That money wasn't the point. If it was, she would have used the card for herself, solved her own problems without a second thought. The point was something else entirely, something he was only beginning to understand, something that had to do with kindness, with sacrifice, with a way of seeing the world that transcended material possessions. That afternoon, he arranged another test, though he told himself it wasn't really a test, that he was simply trying to understand her better, to unravel the enigma of her selflessness. He had Jonathan leave an envelope on Amara's cleaning cart, an envelope containing $5,000 in cash and a note. "For excellent service, H." He watched through his security system as she found it, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension churning within him. She stared at the money for a long moment, her face unreadable, then carefully picked it up and walked directly to his study, her movements purposeful. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, knocking gently on his door. "Come in," he replied, his voice a little rough. She entered the study, holding out the envelope. "You left this on my cart by mistake." "It's not a mistake, Amara," Victor said, his eyes meeting hers. "It's a bonus. For your hard work. It is my way of saying thank you. It should have been sent to you months ago." "Sir, this is too much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't accept this. Your salary has also been increased," Victor continued, ignoring her protest. "You'll see it reflected in your next paycheck." Instead of joy or relief, her face showed distress, a deep sense of unease. "Sir, did I do something wrong? Am I being punished? Is this because of what I bought with the card? I can pay it back, I just did what I thought was right. I did not do anything wrong." "No," Victor said sharply, then caught himself, surprised by the vehemence of his own reaction. Why did the idea of her paying it back anger him so much, as if she was challenging his generosity, rejecting his attempt to make amends? "No, Amara. This is because you've been an exemplary employee. Nothing more. Think of it as a just reward for your actions, not a payment for silence." She left the money on his desk, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Thank you, sir, but I'm paid fairly for my work. I don't need extra." After she left, Victor stared at the abandoned envelope, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. When was the last time someone had refused his money? When was the last time someone had told him they didn't need more, that they were content with what they had? It was a question he couldn't answer, a void in his memory that spoke volumes about the kind of life he had lived. The tensions in the household were becoming impossible to ignore, the atmosphere thick with resentment and suspicion. Gregory had begun a whispering campaign against Amara, fueled by envy and resentment, suggesting that she was manipulating Victor, that her poverty act was just that. An act, a carefully constructed facade designed to ingratiate herself with the old man. "Mark my words," Gregory told the gathered staff at dinner, his voice loud enough for Amara to hear from the kitchen. "She's playing a long game, acting all noble and selfless, but it's all a performance. She probably knows those people she helped, getting the benefit out of it." "That doesn't even make sense," Susan protested, her brow furrowed in confusion. "How would you get kickbacks from paying medical bills, Gregory?" "Maybe she's building a network," Marcus suggested, his eyes gleaming with a hint of malice. "Building up a source of favors in the long run, building up a list of people who owe her a debt. You help someone when they're desperate, and they owe you forever. She could be planning to set up a business one day and use them as a base of support. Or maybe," David added with a knowing look, his voice dripping with innuendo, "she's trying to seduce the old man, playing on his sympathies with her stories of hardship. You've all noticed how he watches her now, his eyes like a hawk." Amara, listening from the kitchen, felt tears prick at her eyes, her hands trembling. She had known this would happen, that her act of generosity would be misconstrued, that her motives would be questioned. No good deed went unpunished in places like this, she thought bitterly. She should have just bought something for herself, something small and forgettable, something that wouldn't have drawn attention to herself. Now she was a target, a pawn in their petty power games. That evening, she was carrying a load of fresh linens up the main staircase, her arms full, when Gregory deliberately bumped into her, his face wearing a smirk of triumph. The sheets went flying, floating down like white ghosts over the banister, scattering across the polished floor. "How clumsy of you, Amara," Gregory said loudly, his voice filled with mock concern. "Really, you should be more careful. Mr. Hale won't keep you around forever just because you can play the act of charity. He'll soon tire of your story." She knelt to gather the sheets, her face burning with humiliation, her hands trembling as she tried to maintain her composure. Other staff members passed by, some smirking, some looking away uncomfortably, unwilling to get involved in the escalating drama. No one helped. From his study doorway, Victor watched it all unfold, his face a mask of cold fury. The old him would have enjoyed the drama, seen it as a form of entertainment, a clash of personalities to be observed with detached amusement. But now, watching Amara silently pick up each sheet, maintaining her dignity despite the humiliation, his heart breaking as she held her head up, he felt something crack inside his chest, a sense of shame so profound that it threatened to overwhelm him. It was time to do something. Later that night, unable to focus on work, Victor found himself drawn to a part of the mansion he rarely visited, the staff library. Not his personal library with its first editions and leather-bound volumes, but the small, unassuming staff library where employees could borrow books during their breaks, a forgotten corner of the estate that had been gathering dust for years. Amara was there, as he had somehow known she would be, a beacon of light in the dimly lit room. She was tutoring Lucy, the groundskeeper's daughter, a bright-eyed girl who struggled with geography. Both of them were bent over a textbook, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a table lamp. "Okay, Lucy?" Amara was asking, her voice gentle and encouraging. "What's the capital of Montana?" "Helena," Lucy said proudly, her face beaming with satisfaction. "Perfect," Amara exclaimed, her eyes shining with genuine enthusiasm. "You're going to ace this test." Victor watched from the doorway as they worked through state capitals, Amara patient and encouraging with each answer, her kindness radiating through the room like a warm embrace. When they had finished, Lucy hugged her tightly, her small arms wrapped around Amara's waist. "Miss Amara?" Lucy said, her voice filled with a childish innocence that tugged at Victor's heart. "Why are the other workers mean to you now? What changed after you gave people the money from the card? They are just plain awful now." Amara's hands stilled on the child's hair, her face clouding over with sadness. "They're not mean, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice tinged with a hint of weariness. "They just don't understand some things. They just don't understand me. I suppose it's difficult for them to do so. My dad says you're the kindest person here," Lucy continued, her voice earnest. "He says you help people you don't even know, and he says you're an amazing person." "Your dad is very sweet," Amara replied, a small smile gracing her lips. "Is that bad? Helping people you don't know?" Lucy asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "No, Lucy," Amara said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting the child's with unwavering sincerity. "It's never bad to help people, even if others don't understand why. Never be afraid to show kindness to the ones in need." After Lucy had left, Amara remained seated at the table, her head in her hands, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Victor was about to retreat silently when she spoke without looking up, her voice soft but clear. "I know you're there, Mr. Hale," she said, her words hanging in the air. He stepped into the room, unsure why he felt like a child caught eavesdropping, a trespasser in her private sanctuary. "How did you know I was there?" "Your cologne?" she replied, finally looking up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of resignation and weariness. "It's very distinctive. Did you need something, sir?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. "I wanted to ask you something, Amara," Victor said, his voice unusually hesitant. "The families you helped, did you know them? Had you met them before?" "No, sir." "Then why? Why them and not your own family? Why medical bills for strangers when you have needs yourself? I know about your mother's medical bills, your brother's tuition. Why help strangers?" Amara was quiet for so long that Victor thought she wouldn't answer, that she would simply deflect the question with polite platitudes. Then, she finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "When I was 15, she said, her eyes lost in the distant memories of her past. "My father died suddenly. We lost our house, everything. We were living in our car, struggling to survive day by day. One night it was so cold, and my brother Jerome was sick. We were down on our luck and I was desperate." She paused, lost in the memory, her voice trembling slightly. "I went to the emergency room, begging them to see him, even though we couldn't pay. We didn't have any money, and it was awful to feel like that." She paused, lost in the memory. "They were going to turn us away," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "They were going to leave us out in the cold, to die in our car. I will never forget what it was like. Then this woman," she said, her eyes meeting Victor's with a glimmer of hope. "I never learned her name. Her face is a blurred vision of compassion and kindness in my memory. She was there with her own sick child, a single mother who was working 2 jobs and trying to make a living, but she paid for Jerome's treatment, paid for antibiotics, even gave us money for a motel room that night, giving up her own money." "Why?" Victor asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his throat tightening with emotion. "Why would a stranger do that?" She said something I've never forgotten. A woman who did not have it easy herself looked out for a family that was even more unfortunate. "So what did she say?" He snapped back to attention, the hum of the boardroom fading into sharp focus. "What? The Morrison acquisition. Should we proceed?" He hesitated, a rare occurrence that sent ripples of unease through the room. I need more time to consider it." The board members exchanged glances, a silent language of surprise and concern passing between them. Victor Hale never needed more time. He was a force of nature, decisive and unyielding, making billion-dollar calls on instinct. Something was definitely off. After the meeting adjourned, his oldest board member and confidant, James Patterson, gently steered him aside. "Victor, is everything all right? You seem distracted lately." I'm fine, James, Victor replied, his voice a touch too sharp. James's brow furrowed. Is it health-related? You know you can tell us if. I said, I'm fine, Victor snapped, the outburst immediately followed by a wave of self-reproach. He softened his tone, catching himself. I'm just reevaluating some things. James studied him with the practiced eye of someone who had known him for decades. In all the years I've known you, Victor, you've never reevaluated anything. You decide, you act, you move on. What's changed? Victor didn't answer, caught between the urge to confide and the utter absurdity of the truth. How could he possibly explain that a maid, earning minimum wage, had somehow managed to make him question the very foundation upon which he'd built his life? That evening, his curiosity, long dormant, roared to life. He did something he'd never contemplated before. He ventured into the servants' quarters during their off hours. The hallway was narrow and claustrophobic, dimly lit, with a row of doors pressed close together. He could hear the muted sounds of televisions playing, the aroma of someone cooking dinner, fragments of muffled phone conversations. A world so utterly different from his own. He found Amara's room and knocked softly, his knuckles rapping against the thin wood. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in genuine shock. Mr. Hale, is something wrong? No, I just... He paused, realizing how utterly ridiculous he must seem, standing there without a coherent reason for being there. Then his eyes drifted past her and into the room, and the carefully rehearsed words vanished from his mind. The room was tiny, barely larger than his walk-in closet, a stark contrast to the opulence that surrounded him. A single bed was pushed against one wall, a small dresser with a cracked mirror stood opposite it, and a single, worn chair sat in the corner. But it wasn't the Spartan furnishings that caught his attention. It was the personal touches, the details that spoke volumes about the woman who lived there. Photos covered one wall, a collage of faces that radiated warmth and love. Her family, he assumed. A woman who looked like an older, more weathered version of Amara, her mother. A young man in a university sweatshirt, her brother. Scattered amongst the family portraits were certificates of appreciation from various volunteer organizations, evidence of a life dedicated to service. And pinned to a corkboard, a child's drawing signed Love, Lucy. His gaze settled on the small nightstand beside the bed. On it lay a notebook, its pages filled with handwritten entries. Even from the doorway, he could see that it was a list, names with dollar amounts next to them. People she wanted to help. Dreams she couldn't afford to realize. Sir, should I come to your study? Amara asked, her voice laced with a mixture of concern and a clear discomfort at him seeing her private space. No, I wanted to apologize. For what? For the test? For the card? For putting you in this position? He gestured vaguely. The staff. They're treating you poorly because of what I did. Amara's expression softened slightly. You didn't make them act this way, sir. People show you who they are when they think they can get away with it. She paused, her eyes meeting his. Aren't you angry at them for being petty? You for being curious about human nature? The world for being unfair? She shrugged, a gesture that spoke of a quiet resignation. Anger takes energy I don't have, Mr. Hale. I need that energy for more important things. Victor looked again at the photos on her wall, at the faces that seemed to watch him with quiet understanding. Your mother, how is she managing? The new medications are helping. The ones we can afford, anyway. The salary increase should help with that. I'm sending most of it home. Yes, Victor said, his voice barely a whisper. Thank you for that, truly. There was an awkward pause, the silence filled with unspoken words. Victor, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals with effortless ease, found himself utterly incapable of having a simple conversation with this woman. That notebook, he said finally, gesturing towards her nightstand. Is that just dreams, sir? People I'd help if I could. Things I'd change if I had the power. May I? He asked, his voice surprisingly hesitant. She hesitated for a moment, then handed him the notebook, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He read through the list, each entry meticulously dated, some going back years. Jerome, full tuition payment. Mama, experimental treatment in Houston. Mrs. Washington from church, wheelchair ramp. Community center, new roof. Shelter, winter coats for everyone. The list went on for pages, a testament to her unwavering compassion. None of it was for her. No vacations, no luxuries, no personal dreams. Just a relentless litany of other people's needs she wished she could meet. "This Mrs. Washington?" Victor asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Who is she?" "An elderly lady from our church. She can barely leave her house because of the stairs, but she can't afford a ramp." "How much would it cost?" "About $3,000 for a proper one. I've been saving, but every time I get close, something else comes up." Victor pulled out his checkbook, a familiar gesture that suddenly felt foreign. He wrote a check for $3,000 and handed it to her. "Mr. Hale, I can't. It's not for you. It's from Mrs. Washington. Consider it passing on kindness." Amara stared at the check, tears forming in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm trying to understand something I think I lost a long time ago." Meanwhile, Gregory was far from idle. He'd been observing Victor's increasingly bizarre behavior with a growing sense of unease, noting his clandestine visits to the servants' quarters, his distraction during meetings. Gregory had clawed his way to the top, establishing his position as head butler with ruthless efficiency, and he wasn't about to let some lowly maid disrupt the established hierarchy. He began discreetly searching through Amara's belongings when she was at work, driven by a desperate need to find something, anything, he could use against her. In her dresser drawer, hidden beneath carefully folded clothes, he discovered an envelope. Inside were receipts, not shopping receipts, but payment notices. Overdue rent, final notices for utilities, medical bills marked urgent. "Perfect," he whispered, a triumphant glint in his eyes. The next morning, Gregory made his move. He approached Victor in his study, laying the envelope on the desk with theatrical concern. "Sir, I felt you should see this. I found these in Amara's room." "You went through her personal belongings?" Victor's voice was dangerously quiet, the calm before the storm. "I was concerned for your security, sir. And look, she's deeply in debt, desperate. Don't you see? She's been playing you, acting generous with your money while she's drowning in her own bills. It's all a performance to get you to bail her out." Victor looked at the bills, then at Gregory, his eyes narrowed. "And what did you buy with my car, Gregory? A watch, wasn't it?" "A watch, sir. But that's different. I wasn't pretending to be something I'm not. I was honest about wanting something for myself." "Honest?" Victor stood up, walking to the window, his back to Gregory. "You think selfishness is honesty and selflessness is performance? That says more about you than her, doesn't it?" "Sir, I'm trying to protect you from what? From seeing that someone can be genuinely good despite having every reason not to be? From realizing that I've surrounded myself with people like you, who can't imagine kindness without an agenda." Gregory's face flushed crimson. "I've served you loyally for 15 years. Yes, for a salary, for benefits, for the prestige of working in my household. All transactions, Gregory. When have you ever done something for nothing? When have you ever helped someone who couldn't help you back?" Gregory had no answer, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before him. "Get out," Victor said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. "And if I find out you've been in Amara's room again, you'll be looking for new employment." After Gregory left, defeated and seething, Victor sat staring at the bills, his mind reeling. Amara owed nearly $10,000 in various debts. She could have paid them all with one swipe of his black card, effortlessly erasing her financial worries. Instead, she'd used the money to pay strangers' bills while her own life crumbled around her. That evening, Victor made several phone calls, his voice low and commanding. By morning, all of Amara's debts would be mysteriously paid off by anonymous benefactors, accounting errors in her favor. She'd never know it was him. But even as he arranged it, Victor knew it wasn't enough. Money wasn't the lesson here. The lesson was something deeper, something that was cracking the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart. He thought about his daughter, Elizabeth, whom he hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Their last conversation, like so many before it, had been about money. Of course, she'd wanted him to stop trying to buy her forgiveness for years of absence. She wanted him to just be a father, not a checkbook. "I don't need your money, Dad," she'd said, her voice filled with a pain that he'd refused to acknowledge. "I need you to care about something besides your empire." He'd accused her of being ungrateful. She'd accused him of being heartless. They hadn't spoken since. Now, watching Amara help Lucy with her homework through his window, seeing her patience and genuine care for a child that wasn't even hers, Victor understood what Elizabeth had meant. The empire he'd built was crumbling, not financially, but personally. The test he designed had backfired spectacularly. He wanted to prove that everyone was as cynical as he was. Instead, one woman's genuine kindness was exposing the hollow core of his entire life. That night, Victor found Elizabeth's number in his phone. He stared at it for an hour, his thumb hovering over the call button, paralyzed by fear and regret. Finally, he began to type a text. "I've been wrong about everything. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know." He deleted it, the words feeling inadequate, pathetic. He typed it again, then deleted it once more. "How did you apologize for a lifetime of transactional relationships? How did you admit that a maid making minimum wage understood love better than a billionaire ever had?" Finally, he simply typed, "I miss you." His finger hovered over send for a long moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Then he thought of Amara, giving away $70,000 while facing eviction, and he pressed send. The crack in his heart widened a little more. 3 days after Victor sent the text to his daughter, Amara received the phone call that would change everything. She was polishing silver in the dining room, lost in thought, when her phone buzzed. The number was from Houston, from the medical center where her mother had gone for a consultation months ago. "Miss Johnson, this is Dr. Richards from Houston Medical. I'm calling about your mother, Clara Johnson." Amara's hands stilled on the serving tray, her heart leaping into her throat. "Is she okay?" "She's stable, but her condition has progressed faster than we anticipated. The lupus is affecting her kidneys now. She needs surgery, and she needs it soon." "How soon?" Amara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Within a month, ideally. The longer we wait, the more risky it becomes, and the cost." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken implications. "With her insurance, you're looking at approximately $40,000 out of pocket. I know that's substantial, but—" "Thank you for calling, Dr. Richards," Amara said, cutting him off, her voice trembling. She ended the call and sat down heavily in one of the dining room chairs, something she'd never dared to do before during work hours. $40,000. It might as well have been 40 million. She thought about the black card, still in Mr. Hale's possession now, but she remembered the feeling of it in her hand, the power it represented. One swipe, that's all it would have taken. One swipe and her mother would be safe. "You okay?" Amara looked up to find Susan standing in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "My mother," Amara said quietly, her voice choked with emotion. "She needs surgery." Susan's face softened. "Oh, honey, is it serious?" "Everything with lupus is serious. And expensive." She hesitated, then added cautiously, "Maybe Mr. Hale." "No," Amara said firmly, standing up, her chin lifted in defiance. "I won't ask him for money. I won't be what Gregory thinks I am." That evening, Amara did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She called Jerome and told him the truth about their situation, laying bare the full extent of their financial crisis. "I could drop out," Jerome said immediately, his voice filled with concern. "Get a job, help with mom's surgery." "Absolutely not," Amara said fiercely. "You have 1 semester left. 1 semester, Jerome. My degree won't mean anything if we lose mom. We're not going to lose her. I'll figure something out." "Amara, stop trying to carry everything yourself. I'm 22, Not 12. Let me help. You are helping. By finishing school. By becoming the engineer you've worked so hard to be. That's how you help. After the call, Amara sat in her small room, staring at the photos on her wall. Her mother at Jerome's high school graduation, looking proud despite being in a wheelchair that day. Her father before the cancer took him, wearing his janitor's uniform with dignity. They'd taught her to work hard, to be honest, to help others when you could, but they'd never taught her how to ask for help herself. Meanwhile, Victor was dealing with his own family crisis. Elizabeth had responded to his text, but not in the way he'd hoped. Missing doesn't erase years of absence. Dad, what do you really want? He typed and deleted a dozen responses, each one feeling inadequate, before finally writing, I'd like to apologize in person. If you'll let me. I'm in Boston, working at a free clinic. A free clinic? Victor had been genuinely surprised. With her trust fund, Elizabeth never needed to work at all, let alone at a free clinic in a rundown neighborhood. Yes, Dad. A free clinic where we treat people who can't afford health care. You know, the people who actually need help. The pointed criticism wasn't lost on him. I'd like to visit, see your work. Why? So you can throw money at it and feel better about yourself? No. So I can understand my daughter better. There was a long pause before her next text arrived. Fine. Thursday, 2 p.m. Boston Community Health Center. Don't bring your entourage. Now, it was Wednesday night, and Victor found himself uncharacteristically nervous about seeing Elizabeth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been nervous about anything, but the thought of facing his daughter, of seeing the disappointment in her eyes, made his chest tight. He walked through the mansion, unable to settle, the silence amplifying his anxiety. In the kitchen, he found Amara preparing a late dinner for the staff who worked evening shifts. She moved with her usual efficiency, but he could see the weight on her shoulders, the worry etched in the set of her jaw. Amara, he said quietly. She jumped slightly, startled by his presence. Mr. Hale, I didn't hear you come in. Would you like something to eat? No. I wanted to ask how your mother is doing. Her hands paused in their work, her expression clouding over. She's managing, sir. That's not what I asked. Amara turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. She needs surgery soon, but we'll figure it out. We always do. The cost. It doesn't matter. We'll find a way. Amara, if you need, please. Mr. Hale, don't. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. I know you mean well, but I can't be the maid who took money from her employer for personal matters. Gregory already thinks I'm manipulating you. Others would agree. I need this job and I need my dignity. Please don't make me choose between them. Victor wanted to argue, to tell her that dignity didn't pay medical bills. But he saw the unwavering pride in her eyes, the same pride he'd once possessed before money made everything easy and meaningless. I understand, he said quietly, the words feeling hollow even to his own ears. But he didn't, not really. That night, he made more phone calls, his voice a low murmur in the darkness. The surgery would be covered by an anonymous medical grant that Amara's mother would miraculously qualify for. It was becoming a pattern, him secretly solving her problems while she steadfastly refused to ask for help. The next day, Victor flew to Boston alone, as Elizabeth had requested, leaving his entourage behind. The clinic was located in a rough part of the city, the kind of neighborhood his driver would normally avoid. But he'd driven himself, parking his rental car between a rusted van and a battered pickup truck. The clinic's waiting room was packed. Families with young children, elderly people with walkers, young adults looking exhausted and sick. The chairs were mismatched and worn. The paint was peeling from the walls. But despite the obvious signs of neglect, there was something warm about the place, something alive. Can I help you? The receptionist asked, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his expensive suit. I'm here to see Dr. Elizabeth Hale. Are you a patient? I'm her father. The receptionist's eyes widened in surprise. Oh, she mentioned you might come. She's with a patient, but she'll be out soon. Victor sat down in one of the plastic chairs, feeling out of place, yet strangely comfortable. A little boy with a bandaged hand sat next to him, staring with open curiosity. "Are you sick?" the boy asked, his voice filled with concern. "No, are you? I cut my hand on a fence. Dr. Lizzie fixed it. She's nice. She gave me a lollipop." Dr. Lizzie, his daughter, who he tried to mold into a corporate shark, was Dr. Lizzie who gave out lollipops. "Dad." He looked up to see Elizabeth standing there in a white coat, a stethoscope draped around her neck. She looked older than when he'd last seen her, more serious, but also more sure of herself, radiating an inner peace he'd never witnessed before. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Come on," she said, offering a small, hesitant smile. "I'll show you around." She led him through the clinic, introducing him to staff and patients simply as "my father," carefully avoiding any mention of his name or wealth. She showed him examination rooms held together with duct tape and sheer determination, a pharmacy that ran on donations, a children's play area filled with toys from yard sales and thrift stores. "This is what I do, Dad," she said finally, leading him to her small, cramped office. "This is what matters to me." "I can see that," he said, genuinely impressed. "It's impressive. I don't want your money for it." He didn't offer any. She studied him suspiciously. "That's new. I'm trying to learn that not everything is about money." Since when? Victor thought about Amara, about her notebook filled with the names of people she wanted to help, about the $73,000 she'd spent on strangers. Since recently, someone taught me that kindness isn't a weakness. It's a gift. Elizabeth's expression softened slightly, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Who taught you that? Someone unexpected?" He paused, caught between a desire to confide and a fear of ridicule. "Elizabeth, I'm sorry. For everything. For choosing board meetings over birthday parties. For thinking money could replace presents. For being a father in name but not in practice." "Dad, please," she said, holding up her hand. "Let me finish. I built an empire but lost my family. I have everything and nothing at the same time. You tried to tell me, but I wasn't ready to hear it. I'm hearing it now." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, her gaze searching his face. "What changed?" "I met someone who has nothing but gives everything. It made me realize I have everything but give nothing." "This someone, is it romantic?" "No," Victor said quickly, then paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "I don't know. It's complicated. She worked for me. An employee. Dad, she's a maid, and she's taught me more about wealth than any board member ever has." Elizabeth stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. "A maid? You're having an existential crisis because of a maid." "Her name is Amara. And yes, I suppose I am." For the first time in 3 years, Elizabeth smiled at him, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. "I want to meet her." "She'd probably refuse. She won't even let me help with her mother's medical bills." "Smart woman. Help creates obligation. Obligation creates resentment. Or gratitude. In your world, Dad, it's usually resentment." Victor returned from Boston feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter, because Elizabeth had agreed to have dinner with him next month to try to rebuild what they'd lost. Heavier because he could see now the extent of the damage his worldview had caused. How many relationships he'd poisoned with his transactional approach to life. The estate felt different when he returned, the air thick with an unspoken tension, like the moment before a storm breaks. He found out why during the emergency staff meeting Gregory had called in the main hall, his voice booming with self-importance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory announced, standing at the front of the room like a prosecuting attorney, "I've discovered something disturbing about one of our colleagues." Amara stood near the back, her face carefully neutral, but Victor could see her hands trembling slightly, betraying her inner turmoil. Gregory produced a folder with theatrical flair, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "I have here evidence that Amara Johnson has been stealing from Mr. Hale." The room erupted in gasps and whispers, the murmurs of disbelief swirling through the air like a gathering storm. Victor, watching from the upper landing, felt his blood turn to ice. That's a lie, Susan protested, her voice filled with outrage. Is it? Gregory opened the folder, revealing a stack of neatly arranged receipts. I have receipts here showing that Miss Johnson spent over $90,000 on Mr. Hale's card. But the purchases that were reported only account for $70,000. Where did the other $20,000 go? Those receipts are fake, Amara said quietly, but her voice was steady, unwavering in its conviction. I spent exactly $73,437. Every penny is accounted for. Then you won't mind if we do a full audit, Gregory said, his smile vicious. Check your bank accounts, your family's accounts. Gregory, that's enough. Robert, the groundskeeper, interjected, his face flushed with anger. This is harassment. It's due diligence. Mr. Hale trusted us with unlimited funds. We have a responsibility to ensure that trust wasn't violated. You bought a Rolex? Susan shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. How is that not violating trust? I was honest about it. I didn't pretend to be charitable while secretly enriching myself. Victor had heard enough. He descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence, each step a thunderclap. Mr. Hale, Gregory said smoothly, his demeanor shifting instantly from accusatory to obsequious. I heard what you were doing, Gregory. Victor's voice was dangerously quiet, each word laced with icy contempt. Show me these receipts. Gregory handed over the folder eagerly, his face radiating a false sense of righteousness. Victor examined them, his expression unreadable, his eyes scanning each detail with laser-like precision. Then he looked at Amara, his gaze unwavering. Did you steal from me? No, sir, she replied, her voice clear and resolute. Did you spend money on yourself or your family? No, sir. Victor turned back to the butler, his eyes narrowed. Gregory, where did you get these receipts? I compiled them from various sources. You mean you forged them? Sir, Jonathan, Victor called out, summoning his head of security, who appeared instantly at his side, a silent sentinel. Please conduct a full audit of all credit card usage for my test. Every single purchase, every single receipt. Start with Gregory's. Gregory's face paled, the color draining from his cheeks. Sir, that's not necessary. Oh, but it is. You see, Gregory, I've already been monitoring all the purchases. I know exactly what everyone bought and for how much. So, if there are any discrepancies, any hidden purchases, any creativity with expense reports, I'll know. The room was dead silent, every breath held captive. Victor could see the fear flickering in Gregory's eyes, could see him calculating, trying to figure out what Victor knew, what he could get away with. For instance, Victor continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm, I know that you didn't just buy a Rolex, Gregory. You also transferred $10,000 to an offshore account. You thought you were clever, routing it through a luxury goods purchase and then canceling the order. But digital footprints are hard to erase completely. Gregory's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. I can explain. No need. You're fired. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave. Jonathan will escort you. 15 years. Gregory exploded, his voice rising to a shriek. I've given you 15 years of my life, and you were paid well for every one of them. Victor retorted, his voice icy. That wasn't enough. She changed you, Gregory screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Amara. This is all her fault. You were fine with how things were until she came along, with her fake humility and her calculated kindness. The only thing calculated here was your attempt to frame an innocent woman because you couldn't stand that she made you look selfish by comparison. Security arrived to escort Gregory out, his protests and threats echoing through the hall. Once Gregory was gone, Victor turned to address the remaining staff, his voice clear and commanding. Let me be clear, he said, his gaze sweeping over each face in turn. Amara Johnson spent $73,000 of my money on medical supplies, hospital bills for strangers, and equipment for a community center. She could have paid off her own mother's medical bills, her brother's tuition, her overdue rent. She did none of those things. He paused, letting his words sink in, his eyes meeting each gaze in turn. She showed more integrity with unlimited funds than most of you showed with your regular paychecks. Anyone who has a problem with her has a problem with me. Is that understood? A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Some looked ashamed, others relieved, a few still skeptical. Dismissed, Victor said, turning on his heel. As the staff dispersed, Amara approached him. Her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Mr. Hale, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He attacked you because of my test. That makes it my responsibility. He was scared. People do terrible things when they're scared. You're defending him after what he just tried to do to you? Victor asked, his voice incredulous. I'm not defending his actions, but I understand his fear. He saw his position threatened and lashed out. It's human. Victor stared at her, a question forming in his mind. How do you do that? How do you find compassion for someone who just tried to destroy you? Because holding on to anger would only hurt me, not him. My grandmother used to say that resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That evening, Victor found himself in his study, staring at the computer screen, reviewing all the credit card transactions from his ill-conceived test. Marcus had spent $30,000 on himself, indulging in extravagant luxuries. David had spent $25,000, mostly on frivolous entertainment. Susan, one of the kinder ones, had still spent $15,000 on personal indulgences. And Amara had spent nothing on herself. Nothing. His phone rang, the familiar chime breaking the silence. It was Elizabeth. Dad, I've been thinking about what you said about this Amara person, and I want to meet her. If she's really changed you this much, I need to meet the miracle worker. I told you she'd never agree to. Don't tell her who I am. Just say I'm a friend visiting for Boston. I'll come down this weekend. Elizabeth, I don't think, Dad, you want to rebuild our relationship? This is part of it. I need to see who you're becoming. And apparently she's the catalyst. After the call, Victor walked to his window, looking out at the servants' quarters. A light was on in Amara's room. He wondered what she was doing, reading one of her library books, writing her notebook of people to help, calling her sick mother to lie about everything being fine. His phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Sir, the anonymous medical grant for Mrs. Johnson's surgery has been approved. She'll be notified tomorrow. Victor smiled slightly. At least he could fix that one thing, even if Amara never knew. But as he stood there, he realized something. He didn't want to fix things from the shadows anymore. He didn't want to be the anonymous benefactor, the invisible hand. For the first time in decades, he wanted to be present, to be known, to be vulnerable. He thought about Gregory's words, "She changed you." As if that was an accusation, a crime. But Gregory was right. Amara had changed him. She'd shown him that wealth wasn't what you had, but what you gave. That integrity wasn't about being watched, but about what you did when no one was looking. That kindness wasn't weakness, but the ultimate strength. The next morning brought unexpected news. Amara's mother had called her, crying with joy. She'd been approved for a medical grant that would cover her entire surgery. It's a miracle, her mother kept saying. An absolute miracle. Amara was suspicious. The timing was too convenient, the coverage too complete. She suspected Mr. Hale's involvement, but when she carefully probed, he showed no sign of knowledge about it. That's wonderful news, he said when she mentioned it. Your mother must be relieved. She is. We all are. It just seems unlikely. Good things do happen sometimes, Amara. Maybe it's karma rewarding you for all the good you've done. She studied his face, but Victor had spent decades perfecting his poker face in boardrooms. He gave nothing away. That afternoon, while Mara was working, Victor met with his lawyer. I want to set up a foundation, he said. Proper one, not a tax shelter. Something that actually helps people. Of course, sir. What kind of foundation? Medical debt forgiveness, community support, educational access, the kind of things that actually change lives. An initial endowment, $100 million to start. The lawyer's eyebrows rose. That's substantial. It's a start. I want Amara Johnson as co-director. The Maid. She's more qualified than any MBA I know. She understands need in a way they never could. Sir, with all due respect, putting a Maid in charge of a $100 million foundation would be the smartest thing I've ever done. Drop the papers. As the lawyer left, Victor felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not for a business deal or a profitable quarter, but for the look on Amara's face when he told her she could help everyone on her list and thousands more besides. But first, he had to convince her to accept it. And knowing Amara, that would be the hardest negotiation of his life. The weekend arrived with unseasonable warmth, making the estate gardens bloom, as if nature itself was celebrating the changes happening within the mansion's walls. Elizabeth had arrived the night before, staying in the main house as Victor's friend from Boston, though several staff members had noticed the family resemblance. She has your eyes, Susan had mentioned while serving breakfast, causing Victor to nearly choke on his coffee. Now, Victor watched from his study as Elizabeth wandered the grounds, eventually finding her way to where Amara was teaching Lucy basic gardening behind the groundskeeper cottage. The tomatoes need support as they grow. Amara was explaining helping Lucy tie a young plant to a stake. Just like people sometimes. Is that why you help everyone? Lucy asked with the directness only children possess. I help because it's what we're supposed to do. Look, Amara pointed at how the plants were arranged. The tall ones provide shade for the delicate ones. The marigolds keep pests away from the vegetables. Everything in a garden helps everything else. Like a family. Exactly like a family. Elizabeth approached and Victor could see Amara straighten, immediately shifting into employee mode. Can I help you, miss? I'm Elizabeth, a friend of Mr. Hale's. You must be Amara. He's told me about you. Amara's face showed surprise and slight worry. Only good things, I hope. The best things, actually. Mind if I help? I haven't gardened since I was Lucy's age. For the next hour, Victor watched the three of them work together. His daughter, the maid who changed his life, and a groundskeeper's child. Elizabeth's designer clothes got dirty. Amara gradually relaxed and Lucy chattered happily about her improved grades thanks to Amara's tutoring. You know, Elizabeth said, wiping sweat from her forehead. My father says you spent that credit card money on strangers instead of yourself. People needed help, Amara said simply. But you need help too. He told me about your mother, your brother's tuition. Those are my responsibilities. The card wasn't meant for that. How do you know what was meant for? Amara paused, considering. I guess I don't, but using it for myself would have felt wrong. Even if it meant your mother's health, especially then. How could I look at myself knowing I'd taken advantage of someone's test? Their trust. Elizabeth glanced toward the study window where she knew her father was watching. What if it wasn't a test? What if it was just a gift? Mr. Hale doesn't give gifts. Everything is a transaction with him. Amara said it without judgment, just stating a fact. People can change, Elizabeth said softly. That evening, Victor called a mandatory meeting for all staff. The main hall was packed with everyone from the senior staff to the newest gardening assistants present. The absence of Gregory was notable, his usual spot by the door conspicuously empty. I've gathered you all here for an announcement. Victor began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. I've spent the last weeks observing how each of you handled my test with the credit cards. Some of you showed greed, some showed fear, some showed creativity in your self-interest. He paused, his eyes finding Amara in the crowd. One of you showed something else entirely. Something that forced me to re-examine not just this test, but my entire life philosophy. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Amara seemed to shrink, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Effective immediately. I'm ending all future tests of loyalty. I'm tired of games. Tired of manipulation. Tired of treating human relationships like business transactions. The shock in the room was palpable. Marcus dropped the towel he'd been holding. Susan gasped audibly. Furthermore, Victor continued, I'm establishing the Hale Foundation for Community Support. It will focus on medical debt forgiveness, educational access, and community development. The initial endowment will be $100 million. The room erupted in whispers and exclamations. Victor raised his hand for silence. The foundation will be co-directed by someone who understands need, who knows what it means to struggle, who's shown incredible integrity and compassion. Amara Johnson, would you please come forward? Amara's face went pale. She shook her head slightly, but Susan and Robert gently pushed her forward. She walked to the front as if in a dream. Amara, Victor said loud enough for everyone to hear. You spent $73,000 of my money on complete strangers while your own family struggled. You showed me that wealth isn't what we accumulate, but what we distribute. You taught me that kindness isn't weakness, but strength. Mr. Hale, I can't. You can and you will. The foundation needs someone who understands real need, not theoretical poverty discussed in boardrooms. You'll have full authority to help people, real people, the way you've always wanted to. But I'm just a maid. No, Victor said firmly. You're someone who sees suffering and acts. You're someone who gives when you have nothing. You're someone who maintains integrity when no one is watching. Those qualifications matter more than any degree. Elizabeth stepped forward from the crowd. He's right. And if it helps, I'll be serving as the foundation's medical advisor. Pro bono, Amara looked between them, understanding dawning. You're his daughter, the one he's been estranged from. We're working on that, Elizabeth said, glancing at her father with a small smile. Thanks to you, apparently. I need to sit down, Amara said weakly. Victor guided her to a chair, kneeling beside her. An action that stunned the watching staff. Victor Hale didn't kneel for anyone. I know this is overwhelming, he said quietly, though his voice still carried. But think about your notebook. All those people you wanted to help. Now you can. Not just them, but thousands more. Why? Amara asked, tears streaming down her face. Why are you doing this? Because you reminded me that I used to be human. Before the money, before the power, I cared about things besides profit margins. You brought that back. This is too much. It's not enough. Not nearly enough to balance the scales of what I've taken from the world versus what I've given. But it's a start. He stood, addressing the room again. There will be changes in this household. Wages will be increased across the board. Working conditions will be improved. The servants' quarters will be renovated. And anyone who has a problem with Amara's new position is free to seek employment elsewhere. What about my position here? Amara asked. You'll maintain quarters here if you wish, but your maid duties are finished. You'll need to focus on the foundation. The salary is $200,000 a year. Amara made a choking sound. That's impossible. It's below market rate for a foundation director, actually, but we can negotiate up if you prefer. I think she's going to faint, Susan said, fanning Amara with her apron. One more thing, Victor said. Your mother's surgery has been scheduled for next week at Houston's best facility. All expenses covered by the Foundation's Medical Assistance Program, its first official act. Amara did sway then, caught by Elizabeth and Susan together. You knew, she whispered. You arranged a grant. I arranged nothing. The Foundation's board, which currently consists of Elizabeth and myself, voted unanimously to cover it. I can't accept all this. Yes, you can, Elizabeth said firmly, because it's not charity, it's recognition. It's my father finally understanding that value isn't measured in dollars, but in impact. 6 months later, the Hale Foundation's first major event was in full swing. The ballroom that had once hosted elite galas for billionaires now welcomed teachers, nurses, social workers, and community organizers. Where champagne and caviar once reigned, there was barbecue and lemonade, kids running between tables, and genuine laughter that didn't need alcohol to fuel it. Victor stood at the edge of the room watching Amara work the crowd. She wore a simple blue dress. She'd refused anything designer, but commanded the room with quiet authority. She was explaining the Foundation's new literacy program to a group of educators, her passion evident in every gesture. She's something, isn't she? Elizabeth appeared at his elbow, holding 2 cups of punch. She saved me, Victor said simply. No, Dad. She showed you how to save yourself. Across the room, Jerome was talking animatedly with some of the foundation scholarship recipients. He'd graduated with honors, already fielding job offers, but had chosen to work for the foundation's education initiative. Their mother, Clara, sat nearby in her wheelchair. The surgery had been successful, though recovery was ongoing. She was laughing at something Lucy had said. The little girl who become an unofficial foundation mascot. Mr. Hale. Victor turned to find Mrs. Washington, the elderly woman from Amar's church who needed the wheelchair ramp. She was walking slowly but steadily with cane. Mrs. Washington, how's the new ramp working out? Like a miracle, but that's not why I wanted to talk to you. She fixed him with sharp eyes. That girl changed you. Yes, she did. Question is, what are you going to do about it? I'm not sure what you mean. Mrs. Washington snorted. Boy, I may be old, but I'm not blind. You look at her like she hung the moon, and she looks at you when she thinks nobody's watching. You two are dancing around something that everybody else can see plain as day. Before Victor could respond, she patted his arm and moved on, leaving him standing there with his mouth open. The evening progressed with presentations about the foundation's work. In 6 months, they'd forgiven over $10 million in medical debt, provided school supplies for 5,000 children, and funded 20 small businesses in underserved communities. But the highlight was when Amara took the stage. 6 months ago, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. I was a maid, living paycheck to paycheck, watching people I love suffer because I couldn't help them. Today, we've helped over 15,000 families. Not because I'm special, but because one man decided to stop testing people and start trusting them. She looked directly at Victor. Mr. Hale likes to say I changed him, but the truth is he changed himself. He just needed someone to remind him who he used to be before the money, before the walls, when he was just a person who wanted to make a difference. Victor felt his throat tighten. Elizabeth squeezed his arm. The foundation isn't about charity, Amara continued. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that someone else's suffering diminishes us all. That kindness isn't a loan to be repaid, but a gift to be passed forward. The applause was thunderous. Victor watched as people surrounded Amara. People whose lives she'd touched, whose children she'd helped, whose medical bills she'd erased. She handled it all with grace, but he could see her getting overwhelmed. He moved through the crowd, reaching her side. Need a rescue? Please, she whispered. He guided her to the garden where the noise of the party faded to a distant hum. They walked in comfortable silence to the bench where she used to eat her lunch alone. It's too much sometimes, she said. All these people looking at me like I'm some kind of saint. I'm just someone who got lucky. Lucky? Victor laughed. You were facing eviction. Your mother was dying. Your brother might have had to drop out of school. How is that lucky? I was lucky because you chose me for your test. Lucky because you had a conscience that could still be reached. Lucky because your daughter came back at just the right time. Luck had nothing to do with it. You earned everything through your choices, your character. They sat on the bench, the same one where she used to eat lunch alone. The moon was full, casting silver light over the gardens. Can I tell you something? Amara asked. Anything. That first day when you gave out the cards, I was terrified. Not of the test, but of you. You seemed so cold, so calculating, like you were dissecting us all for sport. But then I saw you watching Lucy and me do homework. There was something in your eyes, like you were remembering something painful but precious. I was remembering teaching Elizabeth multiplication tables before I decided making millions was more important than making memories. Amara turned to face him fully. You're not that man anymore. No, Victor agreed. I'm not. But I'm not sure who I am now either. You're someone who admitted his mistakes, who reconciled with his daughter, who gave away $100 million to help strangers, who kneeled in front of his entire staff to ask a maid to help him change the world. When you put like that, I sound almost heroic. You are in your own complicated way. They sat in silence for a moment, the party noise drifting over the garden walls. Amara. Victor began, then stopped. Started again. These past 6 months working beside you. Watching you transform the foundation into something beautiful. It's been the best time of my life. Mine too. I need to tell you something. Something that might change everything. Amara tensed. What? I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Amara's eyes widened. I know it's inappropriate, Victor rushed on. I'm your employer was your employer. I'm older. I'm complicated. I'm still learning how to be human again. But watching you these months, seeing your kindness, your strength, your absolute refusal to be anything but yourself, I fell in love completely, irrevocably. Victor, it was the first time she'd used his first name. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know the foundation is yours. Regardless, your position, your salary, everything. This doesn't change. She kissed him. Soft, tentative, but unmistakably real. When they pulled apart, she was crying. I thought I was imagining it, she whispered. The way you looked at me, the way you changed everything for me, I thought it was gratitude or guilt or it was love. Is love will always be love. But people will say, let them say whatever they want. I spent 50 years caring about opinions, cultivating image, managing perception. I'm done with that. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. My opinion is that you're crazy. Wonderful but crazy. Crazy enough to give away my fortune. You're not giving it all away. Actually, Victor pulled out a document from his jacket. I am, or rather, we are. Amara read the papers, her eyes widening. This transfers 90% of your wealth to the foundation, leaving me with merely a few $100 million. We'll have to struggle by somehow. Victor, this is insane. No, it's sanity. For the first time in decades, I'm sane. I don't need billions. Nobody does. What I need is purpose, connection, the ability to look at myself in the mirror without disgust. And what about us? If this is real, then we do what you taught me. We take it one day at a time, helping people, building something meaningful together, if you'll have me. Elizabeth appeared at the garden entrance. Sorry to interrupt, but the mayor wants to speak with you both about the city partnership program. She looked between them, taking in their joined hands, Amara's tears, her father's expression of vulnerable hope. Finally, she said, Mrs. Washington owes me $20. She bet it would take another month. You were betting on us? Victor asked, incredulous. Dad, the entire staff was betting on you. The only question was when, not if. As they walked back to the party together, Victor, Amara, and Elizabeth, the foundation's logo caught the light. It was simple. 2 hands, one giving, one receiving, forming a circle. I love it, someone said, pointing to the logo. It shows how giving and receiving are connected. Actually, Amara said softly, it shows how they're the same thing. When you give him a heart, you receive something back. Not as payment, but as grace. Victor squeezed her hand. 6 months ago, he'd given out credit cards to test people's greed. One woman had spent the money on strangers, and in doing so, had saved him from himself. The party continued late into the night. Former patients whose debts had been forgiven shared their stories. Children showed off their new school supplies. Small business owners talked about their dreams made real. And at the center of it all stood an unlikely couple. A billionaire who'd learned that wealth meant nothing without love. And a maid who taught him that the human heart was the only treasury that mattered. As the evening wounded down, Victor found himself at the microphone for closing remarks. 6 months ago, I thought I was testing my staff's loyalty with a simple experiment. I gave them unlimited credit cards to see what they would do. Most bought luxuries for themselves, which was expected and human. But one person, one remarkable woman, spent every penny on strangers in need while her own family struggled. He found Amara's eyes in the crowd. I gave her my card to test her heart. Instead, she gave me hers, and it broke mine in the best way possible. It broke the walls I'd built, the cynicism I'd cultivated, the belief that everyone was as selfish as I'd become. He raises glass of punch. Tonight, we celebrate not just the foundation's work, but the proof that kindness is contagious, that generosity multiplies, and that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change the world. Tamara Johnson, who reminded me that we measure wealth not by what we keep, but by what we give away. The toast was echoed throughout the room. Amara made her way to the stage, taking the microphone. Mr. Hale, Victor likes to give me credit for changing him, but change comes from within. All I did was hold up a mirror. He did the hard work of looking into it and deciding he didn't like what he saw. That takes more courage than any donation, any grand gesture. She looked around the room at all the faces, staff members who'd once mocked her, community members she'd helped, her family beaming with pride. The real test was never about the credit cards. It was about whether we could see past our own needs to recognize others' desperation, whether we could choose compassion over comfort, whether we could believe that lifting others up doesn't pull us down, but raises us all. She raised her own glass to second chances, to the courage to change, and to the truth that love, whether for a stranger in need or for someone who starts as your employer and becomes your partner, love is the only wealth that matters. As the glasses clinked and the crowd cheered, Victor pulled Amara aside. "Partner?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. "Business partner?" she clarified with a smile. "The rest will take one day at a time. I can live with that." And for the first time in his adult life, Victor Hale meant it. He could live with uncertainty, with vulnerability, with a beautiful messiness of real human connection. Because Amara had taught him the most important lesson of all, that the heart's wealth couldn't be measured, only given freely and received with gratitude. The credit card that had started it all sat in a drawer in Victor's desk, retired from use, but kept as a reminder that testing others often reveals ourselves, that kindness given freely returns multiplied, and that sometimes the best investment isn't in stocks or bonds, but in the simple radical act of believing people can be good. The story that began with a billionaire's cynical test ended with a love story, not just between two unlikely people, but between a man and his rediscovered humanity. And in the end, that was the greatest return on investment Victor Hale had ever seen. If you had unlimited money for just one day, would you fix your own struggles first or help strangers who might be suffering even more than you? Let me know in the comments what you'd honestly do. And if this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge everything we think we know about human nature. About what you said concerning this Amara, I need to meet her. If she's had that profound an impact, consider me intrigued. You always told me she was stubborn, wouldn't agree to visitors. Just please don't breathe a word about who I am. Tell her I'm a friend visiting you from Boston. I'll be down this weekend. Elizabeth's voice held a newfound resolve, a hint of the determination that had always been overshadowed by Victor's influence. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions and years of strained relations. "Elizabeth, Dad, are you genuinely looking to rebuild our relationship? Because this is part of it. I need to see who you're becoming. And by all accounts, she's the catalyst." Victor ended the call, a complicated mix of emotions swirling within him. He crossed to the panoramic window, his gaze drifting towards the distant staff quarters. A solitary light shone from Amara's window, casting a soft glow against the encroaching darkness. He found himself imagining her evening rituals. Was she immersed in one of the countless books from his library, perhaps scribbling away in that well-worn notebook, filled with names of people she was determined to help? Or was she on the phone, calling her ailing mother, painting a false picture of ease and comfort to shield her from the truth? His phone buzzed, a discreet notification from Jonathan, his ever-efficient assistant. "Sir, the anonymous medical grant for Mrs. Johnson's surgery has been approved. She'll be notified tomorrow." A subtle smile touched Victor's lips. It was a small victory, a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of his regrets. At least he could mend this one thread, even if Amara remained blissfully unaware of his intervention. Yet, as he stood there, bathed in the muted light of his opulent study, a profound realization washed over him. He no longer desired to operate from the shadows, to be the anonymous benefactor, the unseen hand pulling strings from afar. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he craved presence, to be known, to embrace vulnerability. Gregory's cutting words echoed in his mind. "She changed you." It had been delivered as an accusation, a damning indictment. But Gregory, for all his cynicism, had spoken the truth. Amara had irrevocably altered him. She had revealed that true wealth wasn't measured in accumulated possessions, but in the generosity of spirit, in what one freely gave. Integrity wasn't about performing for an audience, but about the choices made when no one was watching. Kindness wasn't a weakness to be exploited, but rather the ultimate expression of strength. The following morning unfolded with unexpected grace. Amara's mother called, her voice choked with tears of joy. She had received notification of a medical grant that would fully cover the cost of her desperately needed surgery. "It's a miracle, Amara. An absolute miracle," her mother exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. Amara, however, couldn't shake a nagging suspicion. The timing was too perfect, the coverage too comprehensive. Her thoughts drifted to Mr. Hale. She cautiously broached the subject, carefully searching for any flicker of recognition in his expression. "That's wonderful news, Amara," he responded, his tone sincere. "Your mother must be incredibly relieved." "She is. We all are," she replied, still unconvinced. "It just seems unlikely." Victor offered a gentle smile, the lines around his eyes softening. "Good things do happen sometimes, Amara. Perhaps it's simply karma, rewarding you for all the good you've done." She scrutinized his face, searching for any hint of deception, but Victor had spent decades honing his poker face in high-stakes boardrooms. He revealed nothing. Later that afternoon, while Amara diligently performed her duties, Victor summoned his lawyer for an urgent meeting. "I want to establish a foundation," he declared, his voice firm. "A legitimate one, not some tax shelter designed to pad my own coffers. Something that tangibly helps people." "Of course, sir," the lawyer replied, adjusting his glasses. "What type of foundation did you have in mind?" "Medical debt forgiveness, community support initiatives, educational access. The kind of programs that truly transform lives. I want to start with an initial endowment of $100 million. The lawyer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's substantial, sir." "It's a start," Victor countered, his gaze unwavering. "And I want Amara Johnson to serve as co-director." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The maid, sir? With all due respect, she's more qualified than any MBA I've ever met," Victor interrupted, his voice laced with steel. "She possesses a profound understanding of genuine need, a perspective that's utterly foreign to those ivory tower academics. In fact, with all due respect, putting a maid in charge of $100 million foundation would be the smartest thing I've ever done. Draw up the papers." As the lawyer departed, a long-dormant feeling stirred within Victor, anticipation. Not for a lucrative business deal or a record-breaking quarterly profit, but for the look on Amara's face when he revealed the scope of the opportunity, when he told her she could extend her helping hand to everyone on her list and countless others besides. However, first he had to convince her to accept it, a task he knew would be fraught with challenges. And knowing Amara's unwavering integrity and her inherent distrust of the wealthy elite, that would be the most difficult negotiation of his life. The weekend arrived, ushered in by an uncharacteristic surge of warmth. The estate gardens burst into vibrant bloom, as if nature itself was celebrating the profound transformations taking place within the mansion's imposing walls. Elizabeth had arrived the previous evening, discreetly installed as a friend from Boston. But several members of the staff had already noticed the undeniable family resemblance. "She has your eyes, Mr. Hale," Susan had remarked innocently while serving breakfast, causing Victor to nearly choke on his coffee. Now, from the sanctuary of his study, Victor watched as Elizabeth wandered the sprawling grounds, eventually making her way to the cottage garden where Amara was patiently teaching Lucy, the groundskeeper's daughter, the fundamentals of gardening. "The tomatoes need support as they grow," Amara explained, gently guiding Lucy as she tied a young plant to a stake. "Just like people sometimes need a little help to stand tall." "Is that why you help everyone?" Lucy inquired, her youthful directness cutting through pretense. "I help because it's what we're supposed to do. Look," Amara gestured towards the meticulously arranged garden beds. "The tall sunflowers provide shade for the delicate seedlings. The marigolds keep pests away from the vegetables. Everything in a garden helps everything else." "Like a family?" Lucy asked, her eyes wide with understanding. "Exactly," Amara smiled warmly. exactly like a family. Elizabeth approached, and Victor watched as Amara's posture immediately stiffened, reverting to the formal demeanor of an employee addressing a guest. "Can I help you, miss?" she asked politely. "I'm Elizabeth, a friend of Mr. Hale's," Elizabeth responded, extending her hand. "You must be Amara. He's told me a great deal about you." A flicker of surprise, tinged with apprehension, crossed Amara's face. "Only good things, I hope," she said cautiously. Elizabeth chuckled. "The best things, actually. Mind if I join you? I haven't gardened since I was Lucy's age." For the next hour, Victor remained a silent observer, watching the unlikely trio work side by side. His estranged daughter, the unassuming maid who had shaken the foundations of his world, and a bright-eyed groundskeeper's child, their differences melting away in the shared act of nurturing life. Elizabeth's impeccably tailored designer clothes were soon smudged with dirt, a testament to her willingness to shed her privileged facade. Amara gradually relaxed, her genuine warmth radiating outwards, and Lucy, emboldened by the unexpected companionship, chattered endlessly about her improved grades thanks to Amara's patient tutoring. "You know," Elizabeth said, pausing to wipe sweat from her brow, "my father told me you spent all that money on strangers instead of yourself." Amara responded with simple conviction. "People needed help." "But you need help too," Elizabeth countered gently. "He told me about your mother, your brother's tuition." "Those are my responsibilities," Amara insisted. "The card wasn't meant for that." "How do you know what it was meant for?" Elizabeth pressed. Amara paused, carefully considering her words. "I guess I don't, but using it for myself would have felt wrong, even if it meant easing my mother's burdens. Especially then. How could I live with myself knowing I'd taken advantage of someone's test, betrayed their trust?" Elizabeth glanced towards the study window, knowing her father was watching. What if it wasn't a test? What if it was simply a gift? Amara's expression remained unwavering. "Mr. Hale doesn't give gifts. Everything is a transaction with him." She spoke without malice, stating a simple truth. "People can change," Elizabeth said softly, her gaze fixed on Amara's. That evening, Victor summoned the entire household staff to a mandatory meeting in the Grand Hall. From the senior management team to the newest recruits in the gardening department, every employee was present, a collective sea of faces ranging from curious to apprehensive. The absence of Gregory, the ever-present butler, was particularly noticeable, his usual spot by the door conspicuously empty. "I've gathered you all here to make an announcement," Victor began, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "Over the past several weeks, I've been observing how each of you handled the credit cards I distributed. Some of you displayed greed, some exhibited fear, others showed remarkable creativity in your own self-interest." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room until it settled on Amara, standing modestly near the back. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd, a palpable sense of unease hanging in the air. Amara, visibly uncomfortable with the sudden attention, seemed to shrink in on herself. Effective immediately, Victor declared, his voice ringing with finality, "I am ending all future loyalty tests. I'm tired of the games, tired of the manipulation, tired of treating human relationships as mere business transactions." A collective gasp swept through the hall. Marcus, the head chef, dropped the crisp white towel he had been holding. Susan, the head housekeeper, gasped audibly. Furthermore, Victor continued, his voice unwavering, "I am establishing the Hale Foundation for Community Support. The foundation's primary focus will be on medical debt forgiveness, expanding access to education, and supporting community development initiatives. I am providing an initial endowment of $100 million. The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and exclamations, a mix of astonishment and disbelief. Victor raised his hand, silencing the rising tide of noise. The foundation will be co-directed by someone who possesses a profound understanding of genuine need, someone who knows firsthand what it means to struggle, someone who has consistently demonstrated unwavering integrity and boundless compassion. Amara Johnson, would you please come forward?" Amara's face drained of all color. She shook her head slightly, her eyes wide with disbelief, but Susan and Robert, Two of the more empathetic members of the staff gently nudged her forward. She walked towards the front of the hall as if in a dream, her feet barely seeming to touch the floor. "Amara," Victor said, his voice carrying clearly throughout the room, "you spent $73,000 of my money on complete strangers. While your own family faced hardship, you showed me that true wealth isn't what we accumulate, but what we are willing to distribute. You taught me that kindness isn't a weakness, but the most profound form of strength." Amara shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Hale, I can't." "You can, and you will," Victor said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "The foundation needs someone who understands real need, not some abstract concept of poverty debated in sterile boardrooms. You'll have full authority to help people, real people, in the way you've always dreamed of." "But I'm just a maid," Amara protested, her voice laced with uncertainty. Victor stepped forward, his presence radiating an unexpected warmth. "No, Amara. You are someone who sees suffering and acts. You're someone who gives when you have nothing to spare. You're someone who maintains their integrity even when no one is watching. Those qualifications matter far more than any academic degree." Elizabeth stepped forward from the crowd, her voice clear and confident. "He's right, Amara. And if it helps, I'll be serving as the Foundation's medical advisor, pro bono." Amara looked from Victor to Elizabeth, her mind racing to piece together the unfolding events. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You're his daughter, the one he's been estranged from?" "We're working on that," Elizabeth said, offering her father a small, hopeful smile. "Thanks to you, apparently." Amara swayed slightly, her legs suddenly weak. "I need to sit down," she said faintly. Victor immediately guided her to a nearby chair, kneeling beside her, a gesture that sent a shockwave of disbelief through the watching staff.